Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to SCDawah Live. Today we're going to be discussing, is atheism natural? And we're joined by we were making a joke before, Hamza, before we were communicating about you. So we were like, Naveed said we're going to add this brother to the stream. I said, no, no, no. When we get Hamza, it's like a rare Pokemon. It's like a Charizard. So basically, just because he's very, you're actually more active now online. The last couple of weeks, been seeing, mashallah.
You
You
talking to
come
me?
out your yeah, you come
Oh
out
yeah,
your head.
yeah. Alhamdulillah. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullah. Good to see you, bro.
No,
Yeah, yeah.
I was talking
No, he
to
was telling me I'm the rare Pokemon. I doubt
So
it, bro.
yeah, I decided after a while to do my own YouTube channel and just to post some stuff, and that's it really. Alhamdulillah.
mashallah. And
Sorry, Sabur, I'm sorry. I'm gonna have to butt in. That is not how you plug a channel, Hamza. How you
yeah,
plug
man.
a channel is like this, brothers and sisters, all of you watching. We're gonna repeat this throughout the live talk. Inshallah, go over to Hamza's channel and inshallah subscribe to it. And we'll be putting the link up as well, inshallah. Carry on. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
thank you, Naveed. I mean,
Yeah,
I
well,
couldn't.
since
I-
since 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 you asked, what I'll do to make it much easier,
you
I'll just
put the
put it
link.
as my name.
There you go.
There you go. Anyone wants to subscribe, it's
So,
right here.
Naveed, thank you for pointing that out, because that was definitely the most fabulously underwhelming introduction to the channel you can imagine.
Sorry,
Oh, I
we're gonna
got a
get warmed
channel
up.
and
We're gonna
I
get
am
warmed up.
I'm slurring when I'm talking, and I don't know. I got channel. So anyway, Hamza, we're talking about, is atheism natural? So you are known as like the Ahmadiyya of atheism, right? So
Well, I wouldn't go that far, but
okay, so let's have another underwhelming introduction. So you're you're considered whatever name, right? So atheism and yourself, they're kind of like, you've had this relationship for a good 16, 17 years now. I remember seeing very old lectures of you going back 2007, or you're talking about these topics. And atheism being unnatural is something you only really started speaking about maybe 7, 8 years ago. What's
yes.
the reason for that transition?
That's a good question. I mean, I think a lot of it was experience and engaging with the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because a primary facie reading of the book of Allah, which means an on the surface reading, a primary reading of the Quranic discourse, you will kind of come to the conclusion that the default position for human beings, the natural position for human beings, is to believe in a creator,
Mhm.
is to believe in some kind of prior causal activity, some prior creative agency for everything that exists. And that creative agency is uncreated and uncaused. That is a natural and intuitive belief.
Yeah.
And the reason I'm focusing on the Quran, because Allah created us and Allah ruled the Quran, and Allah is Al-Khaliq, He is the creator, and He knows us better than we know ourselves. So when we talk about what it means to have a nature, then you refer to what Allah, the creator of that nature, is telling us. And He's telling us that we have this innate disposition, we have a fitrah, which is the Arabic term for the normative original state, which comes from the triliteral stem fatara, which you have words like fatrun and fatarahu. Something has been created within us that's unchanging,
Yeah.
that kind of acknowledges God, or it's like an affinity for the divine. And we see this everywhere. We see this everywhere. And I would even argue, like I have in my book, in The Divine Reality, I argue that God, the underlying basic concept of a creator, is a self-evident truth. And a self-evident truth is not a made-up idea in Western philosophy. It's well known. And there are some interchangeable synonyms and terms that are related to this concept. But the thing is, if in a basic way, a self-evident truth is something that is true by default.
Yeah.
And things that are true by default have some aspects or features, not criteria, features. And even atheists, philosophical naturalists, skeptics, we all have to accept self-evident truths, and they have certain features. So my argument is, if you deny the underlying basic concept of a creator for the universe, then it's tantamount, it's logically equivalent of rejecting all other self-evident truths, because they share the same features of self-evident truths.
Yeah.
And a self-evident truth is required in order for any domain of knowledge to progress and grow. So my argument is, we shouldn't even ask the question, does God exist? Atheists shouldn't ask that. Rather, they should ask, well, do we have evidence to even start asking that question in the first place? Because it's the default position. And a very quick example, time, the kind of self-evident truth about time is that time is real. Forget the philosophical gymnastics concerning the A theory and B theory. As a collective, as a human species, we believe that time exists, that the past was once the present. Now, if I said to you, well, that's not true, the universe was created 30 seconds ago with all of these memories and experiences, then we're gonna be like, no, that doesn't make sense. Why? Because our appreciation of the temporal depth of time, our psychology, our memories, other people's memories, our inferences, historical records, things that we could touch and feel, and so on and so. We have an accumulative set of evidence. Now, so because we have that and we believe that time is self-evidently true, then we're not going to say to him that, meaning the past was once the present, the universe existed before 30 seconds ago. We're not going to say to him now, okay, I need to start to prove to you now that time is real, or the past once.
So this is basically a universal idea. It's not something new.
Yeah. So we wouldn't argue why time is self-evidently true. In other words, that the past was once the present is self-evidently true. We would ask them, what evidence do you have to reject this truth, which is true by default? Because someone is saying, say my friend calls me and says, the past doesn't exist, everything was created just 30 seconds ago with all of these memories, including the universe. We're not going to start debating him or her. We're going to say, well, what evidence do you have? And similarly, when people challenge the existence of God, it's the same thing. And we could unpack this much later, but the kind of features of self-evident truth are basically three, that they're universal. Now, what I mean by universal is not that there is a consensus.
So before we get into that, because I'm sure we're going to be exploring some of those features. Like
I just want to list them so we could open the discussion.
If you list them, and then we're going to be bringing on some guests.
So the first thing is universal, which doesn't mean it's based on consensus. It means it's not based on the specific social biological conditions or social conditions. It transcends that. Second, it's untaught. What is meant by untaught? That nothing external to you actually gives you that information. You learned it and you acquired it through your own introspection. And three, it's intuitive and simple. It explains our reality, our day-to-day experiences, and so on and so forth in the most comprehensive way, and it doesn't create far more problems than it solves. And it's the product of a functioning psyche, normal psyche. Those are the three aspects of a self-evident truth, and we could unpack that much further.
Okay, excellent. We're going to be asking people to join the stream and ask questions. It's very important that we actually address these questions, because there are lots of misconceptions, Hamza, when it comes to Islam and atheism and these types of topics. One of the things is that we would say Islam's a natural religion. We would say believing in God is natural. But sometimes we cannot even have that conversation, because the atheist simply says, well, all these other religions are wrong and Islam's just another religion. So they don't even bother actually exploring Islam. So before we even get into explaining why Islam is natural and belief in God is natural, how would you convince or articulate to an atheist that you should consider Islam as not just one amongst all these other religions, and you should actually give it, a more than a glance?
Well, it depends how you see religion, and it depends how you it's a value issue, because I think we have an epistemic duty to find out if things are true or not, especially if they have existential significance, right? And religion tries to answer certain fundamental questions like, why am I? Where am I? Whose am I? Where am I going? The whole purpose. And I would argue you need to take the underlying logic of that approach and apply it to other areas of knowledge. Take scientific theory. So say cosmology, we aim to explain the Big Bang data. Now, say you've explored 16 out of the 17 models. I think there's around 17 models, right? You've explored 16 of them, and they don't explain the data. You don't think there's any epistemic justification. I believe those 16 models do not explain the data. Therefore, the next one, or the other model, is also not going to explain the data. Now, that's not how you do science, right? You explore all the options and you assess them carefully. There is a logical fallacy here. Just because something is termed as a religion and you've explored 9 out of 10 religions and all 9 are wrong, you say, therefore, the 10th one is wrong. That's actually a false inference. You're not inferring adequately. You're you don't have enough confirmations, or you don't have enough data to make that it's not a valid inference, because the 10th one actually can be the answer.
It can.
So that's an easy way of putting it from that perspective.
Thank you for giving that concise answer. We're now going to go to Mahesh Mahant. Welcome to SCDawah Live. Where are you calling from?
Hey, hi. I'm based out of Portland, Oregon, in US.
Welcome.
And thank you for arranging this session. Interesting one. So my question is, when we look at the world around us and the events that are going on in the world around us, for example, there is like a lot of unnecessary suffering in this world. So when we look at all of these things, right, don't you think that it contradicts with the omni properties of God? If God is like really all powerful, all kind, right, and all knowledgeable, why is there is a lot of unnecessary suffering in this world?
Sure. Just before we answer the question, what's your background? Are you an agnostic, or what's your religious persuasion?
Yeah. So by birth, I'm a Hindu, but
Right.
by belief system, I'm an agnostic. So
Right.
so I'm still exploring, whether like God exists, if God exists, whether it can have omni properties and all those sort of stuff. So yeah,
Brilliant.
I'm an agnostic by belief system.
Well, you definitely made the right decision, and you've come to the right place to ask the question. So, Hamza, how would you address that as somebody who himself at one point was an agnostic?
Yes, thank you, Mahesh. Thank you very much for the question. I hope it's warm where you are in the United States, because it's about -4 degrees here. It was -4 degrees, especially in the morning. Anyway, so if it's cold, let's try and warm you up with this answer. So it's a very good question. Now, this question does have a humanistic impulse for sure. And this is known even in European literature for those who question God's creative agency within the universe, how he acts within the universe and what he wills. They were concerned because they had this humanistic impulse. So it does come from a good place. But however, we need to be very careful, and we shouldn't fall for the trap as the trap that the mesotheists fell for. And the mesotheists are those who actually started hating God. They didn't disbelieve in him. They hated him because they was like, there's too much unnecessary suffering. Therefore, God now has become the enemy. And this is known in European literature. It's actually not really spoken about much. There's a really good book by Professor Bernard Schweizer. He wrote the book. It's called Mesotheism, the Untold Story of Hating God, something like that. I think it's published by Cambridge. But he collects all of these literatures in I think, the 19th, 20th century. And these thinkers were driven by humanistic impulses, but they fell for a kind of, epistemic trap. And what is that trap? That they now fell for this kind of cognitive bias of egocentrism. They felt that, well, if I think it's unnecessary, then it must be unnecessary for God. And that is a huge problem, because there is an assumption in the question that we do not have any epistemic justification to justify such evil, because we look at data and we try and make inferences, and we consult our morals and our values and our feelings and all these intuitive natural things. And then we make the false conclusion, therefore God should think like me. But this is a massive problem, because when you talked about some of God's attributes, when you think about who God is in the Islamic tradition, yes, he is Al-Wadud, he is the most loving, he is Ar-Rahman, the merciful, he is the most powerful, and so on and so forth. However, he's also Al-Hakim and Al-Alim, meaning he is the wise and he is the knowing. And he has the totality of knowledge and wisdom. He has the picture, we just got a pixel. So when we're looking at stuff and observing things, even when it's, it looks like gratuitous suffering, we're seeing it from a pixelated lens. To now say, oh, therefore it must be unnecessary, what we're doing, we're saying the pixel is the picture. And that's a massive issue, right? And a lot of these literateurs, the one who ended up hating God, they fell for the trap of egocentrism, because they were basically saying my way of seeing evil is the only way. And, since God has to be like me or think like me, then he must be unjustified in allowing this evil in the first place. So that's one way of looking at it. It actually doesn't follow. The other way of looking at it is this. You have to understand that there is a purpose behind everything, even good and evil. And in the Islamic tradition, God created everything and created us essentially he created life and death in order for us to be tested. So even our perception of gratuitous evil, whether it's personal, whether it's human to human, whether it's natural, the way we respond to that is extremely important in the Islamic discourse. because all of these things are seen as a test, and the way to deal with that test is to refer to divine guidance. And if you refer to divine guidance and you did your best from a humanly possible, then we believe that God could envelop you in his divine mercy. And divine mercy means what? It means you go to paradise, which is eternal, which means what? It basically means, as per the words of the Prophet Muhammad, upon whom be peace, the way he described paradise, that, and I'm paraphrasing, the one who suffered an entire lifetime would be dipped in paradise for a split moment. And he'll be asked, did you ever suffer? And he will say, by God, I have never suffered. So I think these two kind of points of the answer, I think, are a good starting point for you to reflect upon. One, kind of cognitive bias, and the second one is about life as a test.
Yeah, sorry to cut you off. If you can, what's your name again? Mahesh. If you can give your, sorry? If you can give your feedback on Hamza's answer, and Hamza, because we have quite a few people in the studio, if you can try and make your answers slightly shorter, please.
Yeah, but you know what, bro? You've known me for like nearly almost 2 decades. And you know that's a bit hard, but yeah. I mean, let's just be honest and authentic. You have to just butt in. So I give Suboor permission to be rude and butt in. Okay, so it's not rude.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
man,
Mahesh, what do you think about
the Greek genes? By the way, Mahesh, if you want more information, you could. There is an essay on my website hamzados.com that responds to the problem of evil. There's a chapter in my book which you could download for free from the Sapiens Institute website, and other people have addressed this issue as well that you can find online. And it gives you more evidences and it just unpacks it further.
Sure. So just to give you like my short feedback. So first of all, thank you for that answer. And what I feel is that can be one explanation of problem of evil. One of the other explanation can be that God does not have omniproperties, right? So when I speak with people who believe in religions, right, my impression is that their thought process becomes very rigid, in a sense that they are not open to other explanations. What they do is they look at the religious scriptures and try to form their thought process around that scripture. So my feedback is that if we are to become like more open, and if you want to become like open to like other data and other possibilities, I think one of the other possibilities we can think of is God may not have these omniproperties. If God exists, it may not have those omniproperties, and that's why there is a problem of evil. So that is, I think, like one of the other explanation of this solution of this problem can be.
Okay, well, yeah.
I mean, I think that's an interesting take, but that actually subtly reframes the question. So it actually changes the question fundamentally, because the way the question is originally framed is that, well, if God does exist, then how do you explain evil? Okay, well, we've explained it by the Islamic theological understanding of who God is. Therefore, the Islamic concept of God is coherent with gratuitous evil. Now, if you're now saying, well, there is another explanation that God doesn't have these properties, well, that actually reframes the question. And it basically says, if you had no other evidence for God in religion and revelation, and you looked at evil, and you just looked at evil, you don't look at consciousness, language, purpose of life, you don't look at other values and so on and so forth, you just look at evil, what conclusion would you come up with? Well, that's a fundamentally different question, yeah? And it's actually not even directly related to this particular point, because the original essence of the question is, well, you believe God exists, you have a conception of God. Does your conception of God make sense with, in light of gratuitous evil? Yes, it does. Now, whether there is another potential explanation or not in abstraction is almost irrelevant, because we would say, well, evil is not the only evidence that we're talking about, yeah? Our cosmological understanding of the universe, which includes the micro universe ourselves, if you put all of that together, there is so much evidence to show that God exists, that revelation is true, the Quran is true, the Prophet is true. So that question becomes almost reductionist in a way, because if you would just focus on an evil, then fine, we can have competing explanations, right? If you have an abstract idea of God. But the original question is, well, does your conception of God make sense with evil and suffering in the world? And it does. So therefore, it solves the problem. Whether there is another explanation, maybe there could be, but does it make an adequate explanation in light with all the other evidences that we have as well? So I think your response is okay, but I think it just reframes the question. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of ending that discussion because we have quite a few people waiting. And what I'd recommend you, my friend Mahesh, is to download the book The Divine Reality, which goes over the problem of evil. Which chapter is that, Hamza, of the book?
Oh, it's a good question. It's probably chapter 11. 11, I
Yeah.
think, yeah.
So you can download it for free from the Sapiens website. And it goes over the problem of evil in a lot more detail than what we've covered here. And I'm sure your answers will be there.
And by the way, it's not just my book. There's so many people online, professors, theologians, Muslims, Muslim scholars. They've answered this question in different ways. They all have similar kind of logic behind them as well, for sure. But you could get different approaches from many different people. And I believe if you put them all together, it'll be satisfactory for you. That's for sure.
Yeah, thank you guys. Thanks for the answer. I don't want to hog this session, so yeah, I'll definitely follow up with the questions later on. But one quick question, if you have a time to answer that like really quickly. So like I was speaking with one of my
Mahesh,
Muslim friends, and
Mahesh, what I was going to say, I was just going to suggest actually before you leave was that actually, you know, there's a couple of people we always have to get through guests to be fair. If you don't mind, if you can stay in the background of the studio and then I can bring you back, it's not a problem. Is that fair? So we can get through some of the, you know, we're going to end up with some Muslims just saying Salaam alaikum and leaving. So, you know, spaces will open up. Is that okay, Mahesh?
that is perfectly fine. Thank
Brilliant.
you.
Okay, I'm just going to put you in the back of the studio and then I'll bring you back. Just give me a moment. And by all means, Suboor, I can't remember who was next, whether it was
I
Elton
think
or
it was Elton.
Ahmed.
Is
By all
Elton.
means, yeah, go ahead, yeah. And I'll just put Mahesh in the background.
Mhm. Welcome, Elton, to SCDawah Live. Where are you calling in from? We can't hear you. You're muted, my friend. If you're gonna unmute
I'm
yourself.
calling in from Atlanta, Georgia.
Nice
Great.
place. I've been there
Nice.
before.
Welcome to the show. Is it cold down there?
Not really. It's about 50 something degrees.
That's not bad. So Elton,
Fahrenheit. That's Fahrenheit.
oh,
It's Fahrenheit,
yeah,
yes.
I could tell.
Otherwise,
So-
it'd be in Saudi Arabia. But yeah, carry on.
Yeah. So Elton, what's your question today?
My question is, okay, about God. Okay, if you look at history, they used to call their king my Lord, my God. So God is not a term of a supreme being. Second, every time someone says something, they always says reference this book. But there was a Reconstruction era when all the books were burned. All of them. Every book was burned. So who's to say what's in these books are true? Third, if God is all seeing, all knowing, and your life has already been written, why do you need to pray and do all these things? Your life is already written. If you can change what's written, then God is not perfect. Those are my questions. Can you answer that?
Yeah, thank you so much for your questions. We can only answer one at a time because we have a lot of people in the queue. So which is the most important question of these three to you?
Why do you have to submit to God when your life is already written in the book of life? So if you can change what's written in the book of life, then God wasn't accurate in the beginning.
All right. Thank you for your question, Elton. Hamza, the question of
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that's a problematic question. If everything is written, then what's the point in doing what you're doing, right? Whatever decision you're going to make with that regard, then it was written that you were going to do what you were going to do and you're going to react in the way that you're going to react. So I don't find that as a problematic question per se, because obviously when you look at it from a divine perspective, God knows everything. God has predetermined everything. No problem. Now, we cannot access the realm of the divine. There's no access to that. And what he reveals to us is for us, and it's limited to the degree that we have epistemic limitations, right? God is supreme. God is transcendent. Laysa kamithlihi shay. There is nothing like him. He is the all-knowing, the all-wise. In Islamic theology, when you refer to his names and attributes, They are maximally perfect with no deficiency and flaw. I don't know. I cannot even fathom what all-knowing means. I cannot fathom what all-wise mean, right? That is not even, I can't even entertain that by virtue because of my epistemic and physical contingency and limitations. So I'm saying we can't even really unpack that. However, look at it phenomenologically from the first person perspective. And that's what the Quran aims to do. The Quran doesn't come and tell you, oh, solve this philosophical question. Because there are some questions that we can never even philosophize because of the divine essence and the divine being. It's way beyond anything we can imagine. And that's one of those type of questions. Yeah, we can affirm God predetermines everything. We could affirm that God has foreknowledge of everything. No problem. Now, how we could make sense of our own sense of free will with that, for me, that is totally an unknown. And there is not one single analogy or thought experiment that I have read or I'm aware of that even actually solves the problem adequately. It still subtly assumes that there is a power outside of God's power in some way, or a will outside of the divine will, which is kind of blasphemous. Yeah. So what I would say is, think about it the way God wants us to think about it, which is phenomenologically from the first person perspective. So if I ask you to raise your right hand and you raise your right hand, now I would ask you, who did that? It was me. You did it. And I asked you, were you coerced to raise your right hand? No, I wasn't coerced. Great. Did you have free will? Did you exercise your will to raise your right hand? Yes, I did. And it's simple as that. And that's how I believe this question should be framed and should be answered.
Suboor just popped to the bathroom there. So
yeah. So I don't know if that helps, Elton, but I wanted to answer this as authentically as possible. Now, there are other ways of dealing it with specific aspects of this question. So there is a specific aspect such as, what if God knows what I'm going to do, then what's the point? Now, that you can address adequately, because foreknowledge doesn't entail that your will has been limited, right? So if I know my daughter's going to wake up tomorrow morning and she's going to have breakfast, my knowledge that she's going to wake up in the morning and have breakfast doesn't make her have breakfast. So my foreknowledge of something doesn't actually impinge on her will. So that's one way of dealing a small aspect of that question. But the wider aspect of the question, with regards to how can we reconcile the fact that we have free will and there's an absolute divine will, that question I suspend. I can affirm that God has absolute will. I can affirm that I have free will within my domain, within my personal capacity. How I reconcile those two things adequately and philosophically, I believe it's one of those questions that we still need to tackle with. And I also believe that it's almost irrelevant. And the unknown of this question is actually a sign of God's greatness, because we are never going to know everything about God and how everything works. If that were to be the case, then we've deified ourselves, right? Which would be ridiculous. Since God is transcendent, he's all-knowing, all-wise, and his attributes are to the highest degree possible with no deficiency and flaw, we cannot access that reality. We're contingent, limited beings. And this question humbles us to that degree.
Okay.
And so what I would say is, just to wrap it up, what I would say is, however, to answer that question from a phenomenological, a first-person experience point of view, we see that we have free will. God has told us to do certain things. We either obey him or we reject him, and we face the consequences. And it's actually as simple as that from that perspective.
Okay, one more question, if I may.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, if we can keep it short, though. Yeah, go ahead, Elton.
Okay, if God exists, right, and we exist, we cannot exist without God, without that holy breath. So if that holy breath is within us, is not God within us? So does that not make us an attribute of God?
No, because we don't. In the Islamic tradition, we don't believe that a piece of God is in us. If even to use that language would be very problematic as well. Yeah.
Okay, that's Islamic tradition, right? A tradition is something that's passed on, but
yes.
a man knows not by being told. Just because
Elton,
someone told you this is the way it's supposed to be doesn't make
Elton. Just to clarify, I think what but
yep.
Yeah, go on, Hamza. Do you want to answer that?
Yeah, that's a very good question. You're right. In essence, if someone tells you something, you don't have to believe it. But there's a difference, and the difference is that if the ultimate authority, God himself, has told you, and you know that actually God told you, and you have evidence for that, then that changes the discussion completely. And likewise, I would even say to you, we need to be careful with those kind of positions, because there are so many things in your life that you believe to be absolutely true, but you have not experienced it yourself, and you require someone else's say-so in order for you to affirm that truth. And I know you're nodding, but let me give you some examples. Like, how do you know the world is round?
I don't believe that.
Okay, what do you believe in? Do you believe anything? Do you believe that, if you don't mind me saying, is if you do you believe that the mother that gave birth to you is actually the one that gave birth to you? Do you believe your mother is your biological mother?
Yes.
Okay. Do you have any direct empirical evidence for that other than testimonial?
I look exactly like my mother.
Yeah, for sure. But you could look like your auntie as well. That's not direct empirical evidence.
I don't have an auntie or uncle. My mother is a single parent.
I guarantee you have a doppelganger somewhere, yeah. So you probably look like many other people in the world that you're not related to. So you looking like someone doesn't necessarily follow that she's your mother. After all, she could have chosen someone that may look like her in the orphanage. I'm not saying that's the case, but what I'm trying to say to you is, if you want to be consistent with that postulation, you need to apply to all the other beliefs that you have. And I'm saying, since you don't have a DNA test certificate, you haven't done the DNA test yourself, you have to rely on someone else to do it. Your mother told you, you have a birth certificate. Those are testimonial knowledge. That's someone say so. Even if you have pictures, that picture doesn't look like you now. God forbid you came out of your mother's womb looking like that and being that size. It would be a disaster. So the thing is, you have a baby and they say that's you. So someone say so, you have to believe in the attribution of that baby in the photo being you. So from that perspective, many of us, we truly believe with conviction that our biological mothers are really our biological mother. She gave birth to us. But we do not have an ounce of empirical evidence. The evidence that we have fundamentally is what you call in Western philosophy testimonial knowledge. And testimonial knowledge is actually fundamental. Now, don't get me wrong, the say-so of others can be completely wrong. I agree. But so can empirical knowledge too. The point here is there are criteria to assess what constitutes testimonial knowledge. And in the Western tradition, even the Eastern tradition, there's a massive debate on what those criteria are. But we don't have to discuss that. I'm just discussing with you, be careful in how we make certain claims epistemologically, or epistemic claims about knowledge, because a lot of knowledge that we have is not based on our direct experience or empirical evidence. Most of it is based upon the say-so of others. Even, for example, how do I know that the price of gasoline is like $3 per gallon, right? I know that because I've seen something. I've seen the newspaper. I've heard it. That's my knowledge, and I take that to be true. How do I know China exists? I've never been to China before, right? Mainland China. How do I know it exists? Because some Chinese person told me. Well, I have to believe them that they're saying that they're Chinese, right?
Right.
Because there's a video and it says, "Oh, welcome to China." Well, again, that's testimonial knowledge, right? So what I'm trying to say is, when it comes to geography, when it comes to history, when it comes to historical facts, when it comes to even science, like I had the discussion with Professor Lawrence Krauss, the famous debate that I had with him years ago, almost a decade ago now. He had this false presupposition that all knowledge is what you directly experience yourself. And I was like, no, that's not true. And he's like, well, I just do the science. And I said, okay, well, there's other forms of knowledge, sources of knowledge that are indispensable, like testimonial, the say-so of others, even for scientific conclusions. And I said to him, do you believe in evolution? And he affirmed that he did. And I basically said to him, have you done all of the experiments? Have you done all the science? No, he hasn't, because this domain of knowledge is so big. He hasn't got the time, the resources to do all the science. He has to refer to the say-so of others. Even if those scientific experiments that he refers to can be retested, he hasn't retested them. So from that perspective, a lot of science is also based on the say-so of others. So what I would say to you is to stand in the possibility that someone saying something to you is actually not always going to be false. Just find out who said it. And when it comes to the Islamic tradition, when we say Allah has said it, and the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, may God's peace and blessing be upon him, said it, we believe it to be true. Why? because of the source, and we can prove the source intellectually, spiritually, and naturally, and that's another discussion. So
Yeah. Thank you
I
so much.
hope that was slightly, getting you to think outside of the box from that perspective.
Yeah.
I think
So
that
thank
was
you for
a
that.
very good answer there. Thank you, Hamza.
Thank
Oh,
you.
sorry, Saboor's back. MashaAllah.
Yeah, we have a few people in the studio waiting, so we'll move on. Thank you so much,
Yeah,
Elton, for
inshallah.
joining us.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
Assalamu
Next, we have our friend Aryandit Kozani. I'm sure I butchered that name.
Just before we
Hello.
do that, brother sorry, I'll try as well. Arianat, are you
Arian.
Muslim, brother, or?
The thing is, Assalamu alaikum. I am Muslim. I just have a
Alaikum salam.
question for my atheist friend. I'm trying to give him dawah, and
Uh-huh.
he has one question that I haven't been able to answer for him. So, and he's
Sure.
not here with me right now because I would have let him talk with you guys, but unfortunately, he's not here. So I was thinking maybe I can ask you guys that question.
Excellent. No, that's brilliant. Just before we take that question, can I just ask? What we try to do is we try to prioritize atheists or non-Muslims, brother. And by all means, your question is very important. Let me just ask No Name if he's an atheist, and if not, then we can come back to you. Let me just have a
No
look.
problem. No problem.
Thank you.
I
Jazakallah.
am Muslim. I am Muslim.
Alhamdulillah, all Muslims, right? Go ahead, Arinat. Go ahead. So go ahead and ask your question, brother.
Okay, so I've been trying to do dawah to some of my atheist friends, and I let them know about the necessary being and dependent and independent and all this stuff. And I read Brother Hamza's book, The Divine Reality, and I've tried to take some notes and give them dawah, but they have me stumped on a question. He was saying that consciousness. So when you lose consciousness, he said that you're not there at the moment, but he says you don't remember anything, or you don't remember like where you were or what happened or something like that. And he said that that's the consciousness in your brain, and it's not separate from your body. And I was trying to explain to him that, like, the same as every night you see dreams, but you don't remember them. You don't remember all your dreams, even though every night your brain sees dreams, but you don't remember them all the time. But they still ask the same question, like if you get like knocked out or someone, you go in an operation room or something and you wake up and it's just like 2 seconds passed by and like you don't remember a thing. So their question was like, how do you explain that? Like, how do you explain like consciousness being separate or something like that? Like, it's a little bit of a messy question, but
No, I get it. I get it. May Allah bless you, bro. Jazakallah khair. It's very difficult coming online, especially these days when the online world is like, it's it's like an online scroll that no one can ever rub out, right? And whatever you put out there is gonna stay. It's a scary place. So you coming and speaking, may Allah bless you, man, and asking this very deep question. So I think the brother has asked a very interesting question to cite Dr. Zakir Naik, yeah. And this interesting question is that he thinks that the brain and consciousness are the same thing. And he says, well, when something happens to the brain, something happens to your consciousness. Okay, now that doesn't follow it's the same thing. What he can say is that they are required, right? So you could give this analogy. You could say, for example, the consciousness is the human and the car is the brain. If the car is not working, no matter how functioning the consciousness is, the car won't go anywhere, right? Likewise, if the car is totally fine, it's functioning, it's working, but the human being is dead in the car, there is no consciousness, the car won't function, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what that shows is that there are two distinct entities, the car and the human. They need each other, but they're different and they're distinct. So you can actually just give him a counter analogy and say, well, that's how consciousness in the brain is, right?
Okay.
And then, but he has a bigger problem. The bigger problem is this. What he's assuming something called physicalism or materialism. Now, physicalism and materialism are used synonymously. They're the same type of words. They got different histories with slightly different meanings, but they're used synonymously in the philosophy of the mind, yeah, which is about metaphysics and talks about consciousness. And he's assuming physicalism. So what is he basically saying? He's basically saying that consciousness can be reduced to or explained by, in some way, to physical processes. Now, we don't want to get into this debate right now. We'll be here until the cows come home and until their babies come home as well. It'll be crazy. But in a nutshell, in a nutshell, this is a problem, because when you talk about consciousness, we're talking about the entire thing, right? We're not talking about the easy things like memory or having a stream of thinking. No, we're talking about even the ability to feel, have subconscious awareness in a conscious awareness in a subjective conscious state. It's like if I have a chocolate on a Sunday morning, there is something that I am experiencing. There is something that I am in. I mean, in a subjective conscious state. So there are two main questions that people are trying to answer. Neuroscientists, philosophers of the mind, they're trying to answer these two main questions. One is an epistemic question, one is an ontological question. One is a question about knowledge, one is a question about the source and nature of consciousness. So the first question is, what is it like for Hamza to have a chocolate on a Sunday morning? The second question is, why does Hamza have an inner subjective conscious experience arising from seemingly cold, blind, physical processes when he's having a chocolate on a Sunday morning? So the first question can't be answered from a physicalist point of view, that you can reduce it to physical processes. Why? Because even if we map out everything in the brain and all the neurochemical firings, the electrochemical activity, we did a complete map and we correlated it to that experience that I have on a Sunday morning in a chocolate, then it's still not telling us what it's like for me to have a chocolate. We just have this map of electrochemical activity. You have to ask me, and I'll be like, oh, it's sweet, it's nice, it's creamy, it's crunchy. But those words have a particular subjective experience connected to them, which we're not accessing. We're just accessing the meaning, and the meaning, words are a vehicle to meaning, and meaning is a representation of that experience, which we don't really know because we're not experiencing it, right?
Yeah.
Another question we can't answer, because how does an inner subjective conscious state, which we appreciate to be a first person fact, we have inner subjective conscious states.
Hamza,
Let me finish. Where I'm feeling something when I'm having a chocolate on a Sunday morning. So how does that come from seemingly cold, blind physical processes? Now I'm going to end with this. The reason physical processes are blind, because there's no intentional force directing them anywhere. Also, physical processes are not aware of themselves, aware of anything outside of themselves, which means they have no intentionality in the language of the philosophy of mind. The second point is they're cold. So that's their cold. And yeah, that's it. So they're blind and cold. So how can you have something that is not blind and cold, namely inner subjective conscious awareness consciousness, arising from something that is blind and cold? The person who's postulating the question wants you to believe in magic, wants you to believe that if you rub this ceramic cup really, really hard, you're gonna get a bunch of butterflies, right? So that's how you deal with these people.
Okay, so basically,
sorry, just to cut you guys off. I'm just going to check if the new guests are atheists, because today's show is for atheists. And Hamza's book has a chapter on consciousness where pretty much there's a lot more detail than what's covered here right now. So I'm just going to ask quickly, are Luke, or I don't know how to pronounce your name, are you an atheist?
Yes.
You're an atheist. Okay. So we're just going to move on and ask you a question. So where are you calling in from?
Thank you so much.
Is that what? Thank you. And what'd you say? Assalamu alaikum to him, bro. You finished? Okay. Hopefully the brother Hamza's question was answered your question, inshallah. Yeah.
Thank you, brother.
Jazakallah khair, brother. May Allah bless you. Sorry, we have such less space and less time. That's why we got to squeeze in. I know Hamza's probably like, I need to speak more. But I want to know about how to get those butterflies. But anyway, okay, moving on.
Suboor, please join in as well. Yeah, I didn't realize this was like Grill Hamza Day or something. Put Hamza under the grill.
Well, it's actually Grill Hamza night.
It's true. Hamza's right, Suboor. You can join in as well, yeah, bro. So anyway, let's see about this Luke.
Remember the Pokemon analogy I gave you? That's his own fault. So Luke, where are you calling in from?
Yes. So yeah, I am atheist, just to answer your question, and I'm calling from Utah. And I guess I've been listening to a lot of your guys' videos, like Muhammad Hijab and all of you guys, and it's really, really interesting. I like the way you guys present yourselves and how you debate in Speaker's Corner. And I guess I get a lot of conflicting feelings when it comes to religion, because what makes you guys different from everyone else? Because over here in Utah, there's a lot of Mormons here, and it's pretty interesting how similar the Muslims are to Mormons. Like, they don't drink, they're very conservative, and their Book of Mormon is like the Quran. They don't really fully believe in the Bible because they believe it was corrupt as well. And I guess I just get confused because every single time I speak to a religious person, they tell me they believe it's true. Their religion is true because they have a spiritual experience or they feel something. And I guess I just want to know, how can someone that isn't religious and atheist, how do I determine who is more right than others, I guess?
Yeah.
Because if someone says, "Oh, I believe this because the Book of Mormon is true," well, a Muslim will say, "Well, I believe it because the Quran."
Yeah.
And then a Catholic will say, "Because the way I pray," or whatever, right?
Yeah. So that's a very good question, Luke. Is that the way your name is pronounced, or
Luque.
Luque?
Yeah.
Luque.
Yeah.
It sounds Latin. Is it Latino?
Yeah, Mexican. So yeah,
Mexican.
it's French,
Okay.
but they Mexicanized it.
Luque. So, I mean, look, I'll get Hamza to give a more detailed answer, but the obvious thing here is, if you have a bunch of options in front of you, atheism, agnosticism, communism, Christianity, Judaism, Mormonism, whatever it is, you have to be able to adjudicate between different worldviews. What tool are you going to use what tool are you going to use to decide? Well, it can't be religious experience, because that's, everybody's going to say that's, I believe this to be true because of this. The Quran repeatedly tells us to use our reason and our logic and to think about things. And there's a big emphasis that you'll find amongst Islamic apologists like us to actually come to common terms about using your reason and using reason as an arbiter about what is right and what is wrong, what is true and what is false. So we're not going to be saying to you, okay, become Muslim because you're going to, because we had these experiences. We would argue that we can show the foundations of Islam to be true. We can show God's existence to be rational. We can show that the messengers of God were actually truthful. And we're willing to engage on the paradigm that you're going to have a rational response and we're going to have to articulate ourselves rationally. So I think, at least from that perspective, you'll see that that's what makes Islam different. Hamza, how would you answer this particular question?
Yeah, I mean, just like the way Suboor did. So we believe in the Quran, and we believe that the Quran is the final word of God, and we have evidence for this, which we could explore. And we also believe in the Prophet Muhammad, upon whom be peace, and he is the final messenger of God. And we have an independent argument to try and articulate and show that he wasn't lying, he wasn't deluded, he wasn't lying for malevolent reasons, he wasn't lying for benevolent reasons. The history is all sound, it's not just legendary. And the only option we have, that actually he was speaking the truth when he said, La ilaha illallah Muhammadan Rasulullah, there is no deity worthy of worship except the deity, Allah, and Muhammad is his final messenger. So we believe that there are strong arguments for both of those things. The other way of doing it as well is, which is maybe simpler and intuitive. So I wouldn't really deny experience and throw it out in the window. We should include the experience, but within the realm of the framework of sound reason. And I would say that, look, think about it. When you think about the conception of God in the Islamic tradition, it's extremely rational and it's extremely intuitive, and it gives tranquility to the heart and it satisfies the mind. I'm not aware of a conception of the divine in other religious traditions that are satisfactory. For example, if we take mainstream biblical Christianity, they believe in one God, but they have the Trinity. That's the conception of the divine. They're co-eternal and co-equal. They also have the conception of the incarnation, that the Son in the Trinity, so it's the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. The Son went into the womb of Mary and he was born as Jesus, and Jesus then became fully man and fully God. And then now the Trinity is now, the Son is now fully man and fully God. But prior to the incarnation, it was just the Son, not fully man, fully God, just fully God. But now part of the Trinity, there is a change in the essence of the divine. And how can the essence of something change? When the essence of something changes, then logically that thing is another thing. So in a way, they believe in two gods, right? So that's a very quick way of showing that the conception of the divine doesn't make sense in the Christian tradition, the mainstream biblical Christian tradition.
So
But
before we move on,
think about the
Luke,
Islamic one, which is very kind of simple and
yeah. So Luke, what do you think about what you've heard so far?
Yeah, it's interesting because again, I like talking to just theologists, and there's a lot of Mormon apologists here, and I hear a lot of the same stuff, right? Like, well, it's not always about your feelings and X, Y, and Z. It's more about the logic, and they also say they can prove it too, with like the proof in the Book of Mormon and the Lamanites and Mesoamerica and the artifacts and X, Y's, and Z's. And I guess I get a little lost because there's a quote that I think it's really like helpful in these situations where it says, you know enough about a subject to think that you're right, but not enough about the subject to know that you're wrong. And I think that sometimes what I notice is that sometimes it feels like there's a lot of religious people are a little too, I don't want to say stubborn, in lack of a better term, kind of stuck in a echo chamber of their belief and the connections that they make. It makes sense. Like I like kind of mapping it out like you know that little game with the connect the dots, and if you connect the dots, it makes a picture in the end of it. When I speak to these Mormons and just theologists like Catholics, they connect the dots, and when I'm listening to them and I hear what they're saying, they're connecting dots, but to me it doesn't feel or doesn't see like they're connecting 1, 2, 3. It feels like they're connecting 1, 10, 12. They're still connecting a dot, but I don't see a picture here because they're not providing something to me that's worthwhile, because everyone can say, if you just take away their religion and put it an empty line right there, you can put any religion and anything they say, any religion can say. And I guess that's where I kind of stump up, because again, Mormons also have proof. Mormons also have a book. They also have prophets. They also have all these things that make them true, the true religion. And I guess that's where I get stumped up. I like what you guys say and I find it really interesting, but again, that's where I kind of I'm hesitant to just kind of accept it, I guess.
Yeah, there's two things I think you should explore. The first thing is the angel, not to use the word the devil, the angel's in the details, right? So what I would suggest you do is there's some really good books. If you go to onereason.org, you can download a really good book on the forbidden prophecies, which talks about...
Actually, I'm going to do that right now.
Yeah, do that right now.
This covers, by the way, the Book of Mormon as well.
Yes, it's very good. Actually, me and Suboor both reviewed that book, and we reviewed another book I'm going to suggest, which is The Eternal Challenge, which talks about, which you could find from onereason.org as well, which articulates why the Quran is from the divine, its inimitable nature, and why from that we can conclude that it's from the divine. The forbidden prophecies talk about the prophecies in the Quran, but specifically the Prophet Muhammad, upon whom be peace. And there are rational criteria that is given to you to assess what is a valid prophecy or not. And these are sound rational criteria. They're not just picked up from a book or revelation. It's using your sound intellect. So explore those two books, because the angel is in the details. The other thing to explore as well is just to really think about what does Islam really tell you to do and be, right? Islam has a very profound eternal truth, which is La ilaha illallah Muhammadan Rasulullah. There is no deity worthy of worship except Allah, the deity, and Muhammad is his final messenger. What I like usually doing is exploring those two aspects of this declaration, if you like. So, do I believe in God? Do I believe he's worthy of worship? Yeah. Do I believe that, created things share in the divinity and the names and attributes of God? No. Do I believe he's worthy of our utmost gratitude and our imperfect praise? For sure. How am I going to express that? Yeah. How am I going to know how to extensively praise him and show him ultimate gratitude? What are the acts of worship that I should be doing? And that's why when you look at the life of the Prophet Muhammad, upon him be peace, he is telling you how to worship God. He is telling you what you need to do to extensively praise and show ultimate gratitude, which is really the Abrahamic way. right? This is the way of Abraham, which is to affirm divine oneness, affirm his divinity, that he's the only deity worthy of worship, that he's worthy to be known, to be recognized as the ultimate truth, that he should be loved. Yeah, this is part of worship in the Islamic tradition, to be obeyed, right? Because he's the ultimate authority, to be humble before him, to submit to him, and to direct your internal and external acts of worship to God alone. Okay, what are those acts of worship? What are the internal and external acts of worship, like tawakkul, reliance on God, muhabba, love, and so on and so forth? What are the external acts of worship? How do I pray to God? What do I say? How do I praise him? And so on and so forth. And that is manifested in the life of the Prophet Muhammad, upon whom be peace. And we believe when you look into his life, and that the Forbidden Prophecies book is one way of doing it. When you look into his life, or you could download my book from the Sapiens Institute website, and you could go to chapter 14, which unpacks exactly why the Prophet Muhammad was the final prophet and why he should be followed with regards to how to know how to worship the divine. So this is a very fundamental, profound truth, and especially the first aspect of that truth, because if you think about it, everyone is in a state of worship. Now, the thinker Martin Lings, he said something very powerful. I think it was in his book on modernity. He said, man, and what he meant by man is human beings. Man cannot not worship. Everyone is in a state of worship. He made a really interesting point about, the modern man's kind of chase for absolute freedom. These neoliberals and postmodernists. I could be whatever gender I want. I could be whatever I want. I could label whatever I want. It's, this kind of sense of, charging towards the abyss of absolute freedom. Yeah, he argued that really was the desire for God, because absolute freedom is an aspect of divinity. We can never be absolutely free because we're contingent limited beings. Anyway, put that aside. The point is, we're always in a state of worship. And you remember what I said about what worship entails is to recognize something the most, to know something the most, to love something. And in the context that I spoke about was God himself, but you could universalize and say, well, if you recognize something the most at any point in your life, if you know something the most at any point in your life, if you love something the most at any point in your life, if you obey or refer to something the most at any point in your life, if you express acts of worship like gratitude and praise to something the most in your life, that's your object of worship. So what the Quran came down to actually solve a bigger question, not does God exist, that's intuitive and true, but rather who is worthy of worship? Because we're in a state of worship even if we're atheists, right? And the Quran makes a beautiful
in
kind
a poetic way, yes.
Yeah. Well, if you think about it, you didn't choose you're going to be Mexican. You didn't choose you're going to be this handsome guy, man. MashaAllah, yeah. Cappuccino color, beautiful hair. Let's be honest. You have that sorted there. You're at least above 7, right? MashaAllah.
No, thanks. No,
Yeah.
thank you
So
though.
from that perspective, you didn't choose that. And that had nothing to do with you. Yeah.
Yeah.
You didn't choose your name. You didn't even choose your DNA. You didn't choose your parents. You didn't choose your ethnicity. You didn't choose the social political circumstance in which you were born. Like, even from the starting point, we had no choice over those things. They were like almost enforced on us. So we're enslaved to a certain way. And we're also enslaved from the perspective that I just mentioned, that we are a service to things from the perspective of, we're going to try and recognize something. There is a truth that we ultimately recognize to be the greatest truth in our lives, even if it's I exist, right? There is something that we obey and refer to. There is something that we love. It could be another human being, it could be an ideology, it could be ourselves, it could be a narcissist, right? And there is
I do have a question regarding like slavery though.
Yeah.
I think it's a good transition to Jannah.
Sure.
So I do have a Quran. It's in my library, and I haven't read it all. I've kind of skimmed through. And what I've kind of found interesting, because like the difference between Mormons, what they think Jannah, heaven, whatever, they believe that they will be like a god one day. They believe that it's like a cycle, and that Earth is just a test, and that they will that after they die, when they go into heaven, it doesn't, you just don't like retire forever. You still have to learn stuff and be stuff and do stuff, and that way you can also create worlds, planets, another universe, X, Y, and Z. I don't know, that's more like doctrine stuff that I don't know full stuff, but that's kind of what they believe. And what I found interesting about the Islam of Jannah is more of like kind of forever retirement where every brick will be gold and it will be honey and milk and a mansion for everyone, right? And so I find that very materialistically beautiful and sounds really nice. And every rock will be diamonds and rubies and all precious like materials. But I kind of that kind of scares me because forever living like that sounds kind of scary. Like it kind of sounds like I don't know, in a poetic way, like kind of like prison, like kind of hellish because I wouldn't want to live for forever. I
Can
don't.
can
Yeah.
I ask you something?
Yeah.
Sorry, Luque. Can I ask you something,
Yeah.
Luque?
Yeah.
Do you mean that you'll have bliss forever and will you get bored of it? Is that what you're saying? Because
I
that's the perfect
I
situation, and will you get bored of it forever? Is that what you're trying to state?
I feel like it's not that I will be bored. I'll feel kind of it's like Superman doing a boxing match. You'll always win. And I feel like I'm so used to being a human, I guess. I'm trying to humanize Jenna in heaven.
Yeah, Luke.
But I
Luke,
feel like
the
that's
best way.
what makes me and us like the experience of living and existing is a trials, right?
Sure.
And
Luke,
having
I think
that. Yeah,
the
sorry.
easiest way of dealing with this question is basically saying this: you're going to be in a state in which you don't want to be in any other state, and any
Will I
other state.
cease being Ricky
Wait,
then?
yeah, but let me just make the point in Jannah. So,
Yeah.
like the concept of bliss and happiness
Mhm.
is being in a state in which you don't want to be in any other state, and if you were to be in any other state, it would be better than the previous state. Now, the reason I'm mentioning it in this way is because there is a presumption here that you're going to even have this sense of, I'm scared, or this is going to be boring, or those descriptions in paradise. Yes, there are descriptions, but we don't know their full reality as per the teachings of Islam. And for example, one companion, and people could correct me if I'm wrong here, he just wanted to farm. He loved farming so much. He said, I just want to farm. Yeah. You're going to farm for eternity. You want to farm. And in that process of farming, you're not going to be in that bored state, in any negative emotion. It will be like a state of eternal bliss. So even the kind of presumption of, well, we're applying our kind of existential first person experience assumptions in the world, and we're applying it into paradise. But paradise is that state in which we don't want to be in any other state. We're going to have any removal of vain speech, any worry. It's going to be like bliss on tap. Yeah. And that's why I tried to summarize it in the beginning by saying you're going to be in a state in which you don't want to be in any other state. And when you go in another state, it'll be better than the previous one. That's how amazing paradise is. So even the thought of, do I want to be like, winning boxing matches all the time when I know I'm just always going to win? It's boring. But that's like a false analogy from that perspective, because paradise what you're describing there is not a state of bliss. Do you see? So
Yes.
that's the point. That's the easiest way. But I just wanted to round off the previous question about worshipping. Since our existential first person experience way of being is to worship something, as we just discussed previously, then we should ask ourselves the question, well, who is worthy of worship? And that's what the Quran, if you frame the Quran from that perspective,
how do we get to the who?
The Quran came to answer that question. Yeah, say that again.
How did we get to who? The question of who should we worship, like,
who
and why worship?
So, yeah, because if your default position is worship, as we discussed, so if your existential first person experience as a human being, there's going to be at some point in your life you're going to recognize something the most. There's going to be something in your life that you're going to love the most, even if it's a split moment. There's going to be something that you refer to or obey the most. There's going to be something that you express acts of worship, such as extensive praise and gratitude towards the most. That's your kind of object of worship from that perspective. So the Quran came down to say, well, who is worthy of worship? Is that thing actually worthy of your worship? And the Quran makes a beautiful illustration in chapter 39, verse 29, that says, consider the situation of two people. one person is a servant to many masters and they're all arguing and quarreling. Another servant is a servant to one master. Whose condition is best? So this is a very
Would we say
powerful way.
that those two comparisons of worship are equal in saying? Sorry if I keep cutting off. It's just because I kind of want to get definitions right. Like when I worship, let's say, I don't know, food, like a certain type of food. I really like this food, or some show because I really like this show. Is it correct to use that same word of worship for the poetic version of saying, "Oh, I worship this food"? Oh, so that now equals to you should worship this deity?
No. Yeah, so what we're saying, the thing that you love the most. I don't think many people are going to say, I love Kentucky Fried Chicken more than my mother or more than myself, right? There's going to be something that you love the most, right? Not things that you love. Of course, you're going to love so many different things at different levels. But the human existence is there's going to be a point in your life, whether it's a long period or a short period, that you're going to recognize something as the greatest truth for you. Even if it's a shallow truth, it's going to be the greatest truth for you. There's going to be something that you're going to love the most. It might be your mother, it might be yourself, it might be your ego, God knows, right? There's going to be something that you obey and refer to the most. There's going to be something that you express ultimate gratitude and ultimate praise towards the most. So from a first person experience point of view, that is really, if you could answer those things with one thing or a couple of those things are your objects of worship. Now, what Islam came to do is actually to literally liberate you from that perspective. That illustration that I mentioned from the Quran is quite a powerful one, because if someone is enslaved or at service to all of these masters and they're all quarreling, well, their condition is not better than the one who has one master. And if you think about God himself, in the Islamic tradition, God has more affection for you than your own mother. God knows you better than you know yourself, and he is our creator, and so on and so forth. So connecting to him, recognizing him as the ultimate truth, obeying him, loving him, worshiping him, directing your acts of worship towards him, ultimate gratitude, extensive praise. If you direct that just to him alone, that frees you from the other kind of the kind of lowly aspects of the other servitude that we have going on in
Allah's
our lives,
not a
right?
he, right?
No, Allah is not the sea. So in the Arabic tradition, when you say huwa, it's like an entity or a thing. It's not necessarily a gender thing.
Yeah.
So English is a bit impoverished from that perspective. So when you say, for example, Allah, the name Allah, according to the Arabic linguist, is al-ilah, the deity, and it has no gender. It's a genderless name, and it has no plural, right?
Okay.
Which is very interesting. So when we say he, we don't mean, like a human,
like a male, man. Yeah.
Not from that perspective at all. So, and what's interesting about the name Allah, that is actually the name of the Christian tradition for God, because Jesus spoke in Aramaic, right?
Yeah.
Ask any Christian, say, yeah, he spoke Aramaic. Okay, so read the Aramaic Bible. You will see that God is referred to as Allah, right? It's the same root, al-ilah, the deity, which is very, very interesting, because some people say, Allah is an alien name. But if you think about it, the name Allah is actually part of the Christian tradition. It's probably it's more of a Western name for God than God himself. That's an English. Yeah. That came way after. English is a pidgin language, right? All these languages came together and just blah, 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 and you get English, right?
Germanic language, yeah.
Yeah. So so I explore that. So explore those books, which goes to talk about why the Prophet is true from the perspective of prophecies. Explore the Eternal Challenge book, which you could download from onereason.org.
And that book, would it answer my initial question or my confusion when it comes to God and religion? Again, you spoke very philosophically nice and good, but again, it's like more of the connecting the dots, right? You connect to me, you're connecting the dots, and it sounds really nice. But
so the Eternal Challenge goes through the concept of God in the Islamic tradition. It goes through why the Quranic revelation is true. The prophetic, the forbidden prophecies go through the prophecies of the Prophet Muhammad, upon whom be peace, and gives you rational criteria to assess, the prophecies in the Islamic tradition and the so-called prophecies in other tradition, including the Mormon tradition. And also, if you go to the Divine Reality book, you could download from the Sapiens Institute website, go to chapter 14. That gives you a very powerful argument for the Prophet Muhammad, upon whom be peace, why he is the final truthful prophet. And also the chapter after that, chapter 15, goes through why Allah is worthy of worship. So when I told you about the shahada, or the proclamation of faith in the Islamic tradition, what we basically say is that there is no deity worthy of worship except God, and Muhammad, upon whom peace is his final messenger. Chapter 15 goes through why God is worthy of worship, and chapter 14 goes through why Muhammad, upon whom peace is the final messenger. So those two chapters would answer the basis, the essence, of faith, which is the declaration of faith that there is no deity worthy of worship except Allah, and that Muhammad is his final messenger. So hopefully all of those things would really narrow your journey now, I think, because as we said before, the angel is in the details. Yeah. So yeah, everyone claims this, that, and the other, but okay, well, let's look at the details. And when you look at the details of the Islamic tradition, I think you will find it extremely compelling, inshallah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much.
Luke,
Yeah.
I've just in the private chat, I've sent our email, scdawah@gmail.com. And if you can also put your email in the private chat, and then we could continue our sort of communication. The thing is that it is so important to come with the right frame of mind when it comes to these questions about religion. And you already have that. You're not coming here saying, I think all of this is hopeless, I'm not going to bother. You're not coming with, I had a religious experience, I don't care what rational arguments you give me. You're actually coming with the right criteria. And if you're coming with the right criteria, then you can adjudicate between all these different claims. And what I also wanted to say, although Islam is distinct from Mormonism and Christianity and Judaism, and the fact is you will find all religions pretty much go back to a similar root. That doesn't mean they're all equally true. What I'm trying to say is that we believe in Jesus like Christians do. So obviously there's some sort of lineage going on. We believe in Moses like the Jewish people do. So there's some sort of lineage going back. Islam is the final testament. We believe in the Old Testament. We believe in the New Testament as being, remnants of teachings of earlier prophets. So Islam doesn't come and say, all of what they believe is wrong. Islam actually says, no, they lost their way in certain respects to theology, but generally the belief in the prophets, the belief in other things, we do actually have things which are similar as well. But I'm so happy that you have the patience and the motivation to actually look into this, because essentially we're talking about something that's going to bring us happiness. Religion is not just there as a pastime to look into what's true or not. If there is a religion from God which is true, then that's going to lead to ultimate happiness, and nothing can lead to happiness except the one who created us. He knows what's going to make us happy. He knows what's going to give us peace. So I'm glad that you're looking into Islam.
And the one who created happiness.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much.
All the best.
Keep in touch, and you can stay in the background if you want while we move on to the other guests. It's entirely up to you.
Oh yeah, for sure. I want to hear more of this. All right.
Brilliant.
Thanks, guys. Yeah.
Thank you. We'll now go to OMNM.
Yes, hey guys, how are you?
Hey, how you doing? Where are you calling in from?
From the US in Boston.
Oh, we have a lot of Americans here today. So
yeah, it's a good sign. Anyways,
a good time.
I'm not an atheist, but I just want to go back on a quick, contribution. Hamza, I think a while back you had a conversation with an atheist, I think, on the Thought Adventure podcast about the same thing, about the hard problem of consciousness. And
Yes.
the guy kept going back to saying, yeah, well, if I had an identical twin, I could map out exactly all the same experiences, the neurochemical pathways and whatever, and then I'll be able to know what the experience is like. Well, my question is, isn't the guy seems to be like a materialist physicalist? So isn't idealism in philosophy considered to be irrefutable? Like, why don't you go back to idealism and tell him, yeah, you are presupposing the brain, but in reality, the brain, has a brain ever been experienced outside of a mind? In other words, everything that we have experienced is dependent on our consciousness. The consciousness is first, and then you can conduct the experiments on the brain and say, yeah, all these experiments, all the neurochemical pathways that you're mapping out, this is all happening inside of your mind. The brain comes after that. The mind is what is the foundation for all of these things that you're trying to do. You're trying to map up all the neurochemical pathways. So why don't you just go back, tell him, yeah, this experiment, you to be able to exist, you have to be able to have a mind first to be able to study a brain. In other words, the brain is dependent on the mind. So why don't you just go back to that and tell him, yeah, you're assuming materialism, but in reality, idealism is irrefutable. So like, why don't you guys go back to that in these conversations?
Yeah, because you know, there's two things here. The first thing is you don't even need to do that. That will be too complicated. Just say to him, well, your analogy just assumes the thing that you're trying to prove. He's saying, well, consciousness can be explained by reducing it to physical stuff or physical processes in some way. That's it. That's what his analogy was trying to do. The other flawed aspect of his analogy was, okay, you've got genetic identity doesn't equal to phenomenological identity, meaning that you're having exactly the same experience. That would be a bizarre connection to make. Fine, you have two twins, they're genetically identical. How does that now follow that you have now identical inner subjective conscious experiences? That would be such a bizarre thing to make. That is one of the flaws in his analogy, and that's a problem. Yeah. And here's another problem. Fine, even if they were genetically identical and they're twins, and the neurochemical firings were exactly the same, they both had a chocolate, right, in the morning, a hot chocolate, and the neurochemical firings were exactly identical in their brains. The electrochemical map, if you like, was exactly the same, and they both described it as hot and sweet. How does that now still follow that they had that we know what it's like for this person to have an inner subjective experience, or the other person to have an inner subjective experience? It may, let's even give them that. It may that they may know each other's, right? But it doesn't answer our question, right? They may know each other's inner subjective conscious experience, you know, by virtue of that. But it doesn't answer our question because we're the one looking at the electrochemical map. And they're using words, but words are vehicles to meaning, and meaning is a representation of that experience. But we want to know what it's like to have that experience. We don't know that by virtue of looking at the map, even if it's identical with the other guy saying exactly the same thing. So it's flawed from that perspective as well. And I wouldn't, and we shouldn't even be charitable to say that they would have exactly the same experience, because they're two different entities and they're genetically identical, but it doesn't now follow that they are now identical from a point of view of consciousness. And if that were to be the case, then if someone had a similar neurochemical fire map, right? If we mapped out the neurochemical firings with a similar experience, but they're not genetically identical, they're not twins, but they had the same, then from his own analogy, it would follow that that person is having exactly the same inner subjective conscious experience as his twin. But then that would undermine his whole thesis, because it's not now about being identical genetically, it's about being identical neurochemically with regards to the electrochemical firings. But then that reduces it again to the same problem. Yeah, we have these neurochemical firings, but that doesn't tell us what it's like for him to have that particular experience. So his whole analogy is totally flawed. Now, I wouldn't go to the idealism route because that has certain theological...
Before we get into idealism, we have quite a few people waiting. So
I was going to do one sentence. The reason we won't go down that route, because when you adopt certain positions, and this is the danger of philosophy, you have to make sure that any sound reasoning you adopt or you conjure up, right, has to be in line with the Islamic principles, with Islamic theology, with the Islamic aqidah. And sometimes we have to be very, very careful, because sometimes we think, yeah, Muslims were rational, so I'm going to make up my own thing or pick things up from other traditions or Western philosophy, and it sounds right, it seems coherent, let's throw it in that bag. Now, that's a huge problem, because we have to be very, very careful and follow certain principles. And the principles are as follows: that anything you articulate to support Islam, to justify Islam, to show the veracity of Islam, anything you articulate, whether it sounds philosophical or rational, whatever the case may be, has to be in line with certain criteria. And the basic criteria include, it has to be connected to, inferred from the Quran and Sunnah. It cannot contradict it. Okay. And that's very important. So when you go down the idealism route, there could be huge theological problems from an creedal perspective. And that's why we have to be very careful when we adopt certain positions. Yeah. and there's more to it than that, but I think that should be that should suffice.
Okay, good.
Jazakallah khair, bro.
Thank you. I agree with you. Yeah, but the point is, because
Yeah,
that guy
sorry,
was
brother.
so insistent.
Sorry to cut you off, brother. We have loads of people waiting, so I'm gonna have to move on to someone else.
That's
Jazakallah
fine.
khair
Thank
for
you,
joining
guys.
us.
Thank you.
Hamza, if you can please keep your answers ideally shorter. And you can
Assalamu
always.
alaikum.
Wa alaikum
Assalamu
salam.
alaikum.
My question
How are you?
isn't nearly as in depth, alhamdulillah.
Yes.
كيف حالك؟
How are you doing, brother Muhammad? Just before that, we have someone called Masi Muslim.
Only because they've been waiting quite a while, brother Muhammad. So
Yeah.
just bear with us. Jazakallah khair. May Allah bless you, Aki. Yeah, go ahead, Masi Muslim.
Thank you for allowing. Now, my question is that we who are living in the USA and West, it's Christmas season. Irrespective of the date, should we be participating? Should we be celebrating Christmas, or say not Christmas as such, the birth of Hazrat Isa?
Just before that, Masi Muslim. What do you mean Muslims for Jesus? Like, what exactly do you believe?
Well, the Muslim, one of the very first independent group to profess to be Muslims, to take the Shahada, were the disciples of Jesus, as per the Quran, when it was questioned by Hazrat Isa. He gave the dawah. He says, "Who will be my helper in the works of Allah?" And the disciples responded, "We will be a helper in the works of Allah, and we profess to be Muslims. So I am a follower of Hazrat Isa, as per the Quran."
Are you a follower of Prophet Muhammad? Sallam?
Of course, if I'm quoting the book, who was the Quran given to?
Okay. So what is your question exactly, Masi Muslim?
The question is, irrespective of the date, should Muslims especially living in the West and USA, celebrate the birth of Hazrat Isa?
Depends when it was. Do you know when it was?
That's why I said irrespective of the date. Irrespective of the date.
I'll let Hamza answer.
My beloved brother, look, let's just get real, right? We have to appreciate that your question comes from a very warm and nice space. I get that. So when you study social psychology, you see there are theories of conformative influence, and some of those things are based upon our need to belong, right? Human beings need to belong. And Muslims living in the West, sometimes they may not have good connections with various groups within the Muslim community, and they feel a bit alienated, or there's some ambiguity, or they feel there's some uncertainty or lack of belonging. And what tends to happen when we're dominated by this secular liberal force that we're living under, right, is that we have an urge to, reach out in a way that we want to connect to them and feel a sense of belonging. But there is a danger in that as well. Don't get me wrong, Muslims can live anywhere in the world. We're compassionate, we're loyal citizens, we love for our humanity what we love for ourselves, we're committed to people's well-being, goodness, and guidance, for sure. However, we need to be very clear when it comes to things like this, and people will respect you and love you for your authenticity and your honesty and your integrity to the guidance that Allah has given us. The way to deal with these questions is not to ask me the question or anyone, is to ask yourself the question: did the Sahaba do this? Did Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam do this? Did any of the students of the Sahaba do this? Were there any principles that they taught us that has been transmitted authentically to us today that we can use, that would even allow us to even ask such a question? I would say no. Yeah, Islam has its celebrations, it has its festivities. This doesn't mean we can't be nice to people and accept their food. Of course we can. This is part of our tradition. Ali radiallahu anhu would accept food from other religious traditions, and so on and so forth. So from that perspective, we have civic engagement, we're polite, we're compassionate, we help people, we take care of people, we raise the moral bar, we are beacons of light for humanity. However, we have our tradition. We do not celebrate the birth of Isa alayhi salam. Even if we knew the birth, we wouldn't celebrate it. What we do we celebrate his teachings. And his real authentic teachings were La ilaha illallah, like all of the Anbiya. And that should be our way of being. That should make us distinct as a community. Because a Muslim, my brother, is not just an abstract celebration that you have or a badge that you wear. It's not an ethnocentric identity. Yeah, a Muslim is a way of being. A Muslim is someone who is a Muslim, someone who does jihad, struggles, is a mujahid. His way of being is one of struggling. Likewise, our way of being is one of submitting ourselves to Allah. And what is a way of being? What's in our heart, what's on our tongue, and how we relate to ourselves, how we relate to others, and how we relate to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we should be in that way of being. We should show people that we are submitting to Allah. And in that submission, we have our celebrations, we worship Allah, and we're given clear criteria how to be distinct from other religious communities, but at the same time, envelop them in our mercy and our wisdom and our community as well to the best degree possible. And our relationship with them should be one of compassion and good civic engagement, but also one of dawah. And sometimes the greatest dawah you could do is being distinct. You know, when Allah says in the Quran that He created us from a male and a female and made us into tribes and nations in order to lita'arafu, to know one another. You know, the tafsir is, people think, oh, you know, you have a celebration, I have a celebration, let's make it the same. You know, we focus on the commonalities. In actual fact, the essential aspect of the meaning of this verse is know what makes you different. Allahu Akbar. Because it's in understanding your distinctions that would actually create that harmony. Why? Because it's the differences and it's what makes you distinct causes fear and anxiety. But if you could show them the value behind it, the truth behind it, the love behind it, the humanity behind it, that difference and distinction from the perspective of the non-Muslims and the Christian community, they would see it as something that they want to embrace, right? So we need to show that distinction to other people. In a nutshell, we don't celebrate Christmas. We don't celebrate anything other than the celebrations that the Prophet ﷺ told us to celebrate, other than the celebrations that the Sahaba told us to celebrate, and other than the celebrations that the pious predecessors told us to celebrate. This is the most safest way of being, and this is more in line with submitting to the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when you do that, even if people think that's different and distinct, it's in that distinction they're going to see the uniqueness, and it will be an excuse for you to show why Islam is true. Oh, so how come you don't celebrate?
Hamza, just before that,
one line. Oh, excuse me, Muhammad, how come you don't celebrate Christmas? You know what? I'm really happy you came to me, you know? I'm so happy you came to ask me that question. And, you know, in order for you to understand the answer, you have to understand the concept of Islam. You got 5 minutes for me, you know, I get your coffee, we could sit down, I could explain that to you. Boom. Use the fact that you're distinct to bring them to Islam and to Tawheed. And that would be a great way of conversation. Oh, how come you don't celebrate Christmas? Well, that's a very
Hamza, the coffee is going to be on me.
Absolutely. You buy them a coffee. And in that process of having great akhlaq and adab and using that experience to bring them to explain the foundations and the concept of Islam, you've won them over, inshallah.
Okay, now you said harmony, and the other thing you said submitting to the will of Allah.
Yes.
Now, if you read Surah Al-Imran, which is 342, Surah Al-Imran 42, it states, Allah gives thee glad tidings of a word from Him. His name will be Christ Jesus. The emphasis is on glad tidings. The angel is saying, Allah gives thee glad tidings. Now, what does glad tidings mean? It means be happy, celebrate, right? But of course, if the Sahabas didn't do it, what we are looking at, is the Quran stating any such thing? Yes, the Quran is saying be glad. And it's the angel is addressing Hazrat Maryam, chosen to be above the woman of all nations, in the same verse. So basically, the Quran is encouraging us Now, I don't look at what the Sahabas did. I'm looking at what the Quran is saying.
No, but there's a big problem with that. And there's a huge problem with that because the Quran tells us about the Sahaba and the status of the Sahaba. And if anybody's to understand the Quran, it's going to be through the lens of the Sahaba before anybody. The problem really here is if there is a pagan festival which is now acknowledged by some Christians that actually this has nothing to do with Jesus, why on earth would Muslims bother to get involved with the Christmas tree and the lights and the fat guy comes down the chimney? Like, what? This is a complete waste for us. In Islam, we only follow two things. We follow the teachings of the Quran. We follow the teachings of the Prophet, peace be upon him. And if things are not found from the sources of Islam, from the early generations of Muslims, any new person who comes along and says we should celebrate because other people are celebrating, we would simply say no, because look, Islam's not something, a fashion of the day that whatever's fashionable we're going to follow. No, we're a traditional religion. We have our own methodology. Why would we celebrate something which many Christians have acknowledged is actually pagan in nature? What I'm interested in is your background, because you're saying you're Muslim. Do you believe in today's Bible, that this Bible is teaching us
The
that
inerrant word of God? No.
Sorry?
I don't believe the Bible to be the inerrant word of God.
Okay,
Anything
do you believe Jesus to be divine, or do you believe him to be human?
The biggest blunder of Christianity is that they have taken Jesus to be God. This is the biggest blunder of Christianity.
Okay. So do you believe him to be divine, or do you believe him to be human?
No, he's human.
Okay. So he's not the Son of God.
He's not the Son of God. I mean, basically, there are so many sons of God in the Bible. So I mean, that is a totally different subject. The subject we are talking of being the Christmas season is the Quran does say, be glad. God gives the glad tidings.
He gives
now, the Allah Ta'ala is saying.
He gives the glad tidings to Maryam alayhi salam. Yeah.
Exactly.
And if you want to be consistent, and this is important, right? You need to have a consistent methodology. When you take that same Arabic word, then that Arabic word is used in very, very, very different contexts, right? Lots of different contexts. And it's not in the context of the way you're interpreting it that, we should now start celebrating, I don't know, the birth of Isaac and so on and so forth. Yeah. Because the same Arabic word is used in various different contexts. For example, 1171, 10:2, 1087, 1553, 339, 345. So what you've done is you have already presupposed, because of maybe, that kind of impulse of wanting to belong and being nice to people, and you think this is the right way, that has become non-negotiable for you. And you've done not an exegesis, you've done an eisegesis. You've read into the Quran, yeah, and that is a huge problem. And you need to be very, very sensitive to this and be aware that that's what you're doing. You're reading into the Quran, not allowing the Quran to read to you, because it's an inconsistent methodology, and that could lead to kufr. It could lead to disbelief. And I would echo what Suboor is saying. There is no better explainer of the Quran than the Prophet ﷺ, than his Sahaba and their students. That is the prism in which you would understand the Quran. Those are the lenses in which you understand the Quran. I'm not going to, with my own limitations, theological, linguistic, and even egotistical, all of these limitations that I have, I'm not going to now say that I am better than them in explaining the key principles of the deen and the key principles of understanding the Quran. No way. So if you stick with them, it's safer, it's the best. And also, if you stick with them, you get a consistent answer, because even doing a brief understanding of the word that you've used, which is glad tidings, giving glad tidings to Maryam alayhi salam, you take the same root or the same word in its different forms. It's used many, many times in the Quran. And for you to be consistent, then in the way that it's used in similar contexts, then you should have a celebration in the way that you're trying to celebrate the birth of Isa alayhi salam. But that's not the case. And that shows to me that you have a non-negotiable assumption or a non-negotiable premise, which is I already want to please my neighbors by celebrating the birth of Jesus like they do, and I'm going to try and find it in the Quran. If I can't, I'm going to try and read into the Quran. So you're doing an eisegesis. You're reading into the Quran. You're not allowing the Quran read to you, and that is one of the stepping stones, my dear brother, of rejecting the truth. And we have to be very, very careful, just trying to be as authentic as possible. And it comes from a human place. You have a need to belong. We want to show niceness to the community, and we think from our own limited perspective the best way of doing that sometimes is having a cultural commonality in this context. But just like what Suboor said and what I said previously, that's not the right approach, and it could actually lead you to having an inauthentic relationship with people. Yeah, and people are always going to respect you for you sticking to your principles, sticking to the orthodoxy, sticking to Islam, and using that as a way to bring people to the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And even if you're very distinct and you say we don't do these celebrations, you could still be someone who is committed to the well-being, because the Prophet ﷺ said, love for linnas, humanity, the people, what you love for yourself. This is narrated by Bukhari in Tarikh al-Kabir. You have the other hadith, love for your brother, what you love for yourself. And Nawawi, who put this in his Arba'in, his 40 hadith, he even comments and says this means insaniya, humanity as well. From what perspective? That you're committed to the goodness and guidance. So you can still be someone who's oozing with mercy and support and commitment to their well-being and their guidance, even though that you're distinct. So just be braver, bro. Be braver, have good people around you, consult the mainstream scholars in your community. But yeah, I think we've addressed this point a bit too much, to be honest. But
Thank you for giving me the time. It's a lengthy discussion, so I won't go into it, but thank you for the time.
All right, thanks, Masih Muslim. Thank you. Muhammad, Assalamu alaikum, bro. You've been chilling in your car, showing us around, taking a drive.
Is that safe?
Are you still driving? Drive safe, bro. We don't want to be
I'm driving
responsible for
safe.
anything.
Don't worry.
Are you in the UK? Are you in the UK?
No, Allah, I'm in the US.
Okay, good. Because if you're in the UK, you'd be like banned from driving or something. You can't drive with the phone.
No,
Like
in the US, they don't care. I can have a gun while driving, they don't care.
Wow. Okay, show us your Glock.
Allah, I don't have a Glock on me. You know what? The police say
Actually, don't show us anything. We shouldn't be doing this live.
Please don't show anything. Hamza
not
clearly
showing
wants SCDawah shut down or something. Anyway.
Hey, it's legal. Bro, what is it? The Second Amendment? The First Amendment? What amendment is it?
It's one of those amendments. I don't know.
Anyway, talk to us, Muhammad. How you doing?
Alhamdulillah. I want to say, may Allah bless all you guys. Alhamdulillah. You guys do good work. And wallahi, one of my questions is off the last guy's question. Sayyidina Muhammad, he fasted on Monday, which was the day he was born. I'm wondering, is that a sunnah to fast on the day you were born, or to fast because it was Sayyidina Muhammad's birthday?
Listen, guys, Muhammad, may Allah bless you. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, very quick answer: we fast on Mondays and Thursdays to emulate the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ.
Okay.
The point here is, these type of questions should not be in today's live. Yeah. For one,
Yeah.
the most important reason is I'm not a mufti. I'm not a scholar. I don't know past nuance fatwas on certain issues, and on these issues, I'm extremely just basic. And it's not we need to stick to our lane as du'at. We stick to our lane, which is atheism. These issues like this, ask someone who's far more qualified. But because it's a kind of relatively basic issue, we should, not that we do all the time, but we should fast Mondays and Thursdays, emulating the Sunnah, the way of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And that's it for now. But those type of questions, another stream, maybe SCDawah, invite a sheikh or a couple of mashayikh. This is beyond me. Yeah, I need to stick into my lane. Just like you should stick to your lane right now, bro, when you're driving.
I'm in my lane.
Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. When I start drifting out, I'll fix it. But right now, I'm in my lane.
All right.
So my second question would be about, since you're about evolution and that's where your specialty is in atheism and things like that, my question would be about these old bones that we have found of early humans and the ones that and dinosaurs and things like that. And I was just wondering if there's an explanation that you would have for me on those issues per se.
Suboor's your man.
There's a funny, well, I think it's funny anyway. There's a funny video I made on my channel in which I asked the question, was Homo erectus Hanafi? right? So, the point of this, right, was actually to really get down to the nuts and bolts of this issue. What questions are relevant when it comes to evolution and what are not? Because you can ask any question, right? Allah says He creates that which you don't know. So that means if we discovered dinosaurs, or we discovered something like I don't know, some strange creature from, something that you would see on Netflix, some weird thing in what was the name of that program everyone's watching on? Anyway, Stranger Things, right?
Natural
Something weird,
Geographical.
creature, right? It doesn't matter. Okay, so when it comes to these things which existed in the past, which are human-like, well, I've covered this on my channel before. We have no problem affirming Homo erectus, Homo naledi, Homo what else is it? Denisovan man, and all these types of things. The fact is, all we need to do is this: we need to answer the question: does the argument that the Darwinists have been making that God is undermined by biological processes, is that argument valid? No. Is it also valid that contemporary evolutionary biology disproves the Quranic claim on Adam alayhi salam? No, it doesn't, because we can show philosophically that it's possible to have exceptions theologically, right? You can actually have exceptions. So we can argue from many different angles that the vast majority of the questions which are being asked when it comes to evolution and Islam are irrelevant, and the only ones you really need to answer are really easy to answer, which is there anything that would undermine God's existence or the truthfulness of the Prophet ﷺ or the truthfulness of the Quran using contemporary evolutionary thinking? The answer to that is categorically no. And any other question is in the same shelf as is Homo erectus Hanafi. So it's kind of irrelevant.
Alhamdulillah. Okay, that answers my question for the most part. Yeah, alhamdulillah. I was just wondering because I was watching wallah, one of Hamza's debates right before the stream even started. It was with Aaron Raw, and the words they were using confused me, and I was like, oh, inshallah, so I'm gonna ask about it later. Alhamdulillah. May Allah bless you guys, and may Allah keep you strong in your deen and keep you guys steadfast in your da'wah, inshallah, and may Allah reward you guys, mas. Assalamu you guys.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakallah khair for joining us, brother. Take care.
No, anytime. No.
Okay.
Naveed, I was going to say next year, not next year, just two weeks from now, it's going to be 10 years to the Kraus debate. That Allahu Akbar. I remember the Kraus debate like it was yesterday, and that debate was like one of those.
We need to do a
10-year review.
10-year review, yeah, it would be good.
I asked you when there's 7 years left. No, it's 10. Yeah, we need to do it because obviously on the stream we've been speaking about atheism being natural and stuff like this. The fact is, a lot of these sociological movements are galvanized by personalities, and when these personalities start to be questioned, and when people start to in the case of Lawrence Krauss, questionable behavior on his part, then people stop believing in them because there's nothing behind the mask. There's nothing behind those.
Yeah, that was like
people.
Like Christopher Hitchens. He was like that, right?
Yeah.
He was just soft. He was a sophist, actually. Some of his arguments were so logically pathetic. It's like, because it sounded so eloquent because of his British accent and the way he articulated them. You're like, okay, there's an emotional oomph here, but when you scratch away the emotions and the emotional fluff, you're left with intellectual excrement. And the nature of human beings, unfortunately, are very sheep-like.
Yeah.
And I remember I was in Pakistan and I had a discussion. There was some like quasi-atheist, Pakistani atheists. The guy was quoting from Richard Dawkins' book, like almost like it was his source of guidance. He didn't understand it properly. I said, "You don't know what you're talking about. Let me tell you what he actually said." I explained it to him, and then I gave him the answer. Yeah, and he just picked it up because it was from, with all due respect, a white guy from the West that's very popular, And it's a social movement thing, but we also have to be less crude and understand that where a lot of people are coming from. Take Pakistan as a case study. When you look at the liberal media in Pakistan, which is a dominant media, they usually give you two false dilemmas. They say if you have a secular guy who's articulate, clean-shaven and smart and good-looking and well-dressed, and then you have a overgrown, fat, scary Mowgli type, yeah, and then the secular guy annihilates the religious guy. And when you're a youth, you want to hold into your deen, and you're seeing that on TV. Let's be honest, you're more inclined to the guy who looks smart, articulate, and so on and so forth. Now, when I went to Pakistan, I explained to them this is a false dilemma that they're trying to give to you. There are mainstream du'at scholars that are articulate, understand the deen very well. They know how to apply it in a modern context. They, whilst being orthodox as well, they're compassionate and wise. You have it in your country. They're just not given the platform. Obviously, now with the social media, they're given the platform, but you have to understand where they're coming from as well, because, you know, a lot of these things is literally social psychology. When you study the Solomon Ash experiment, when you look at the Milgram study, the Zimbardo study, yes, we know there are nuances and academic debate behind what they actually mean, but there is a common trend or fact as an idea in social psychology in terms of conformity and influence that we're really social beings.
No.
And, you know, there are actually certain personality traits that you have that if you feel that you don't have control over your behavior, that it's usually from you know, for example, if you won a race or you did well in an exam, you're like, oh, you know, I had easy questions, or, you know, my teacher helped me a lot. When you start to attribute that the cause of your success is other people, that trait, that focus, which is an external focus, is actually you're more likely to follow the crowd. But if you are more internally orientated, where you think, yeah, if I work hard and I do all the past exam papers and I make dua and I do all of this stuff and I do the right action, I'm going to get success, inshallah. And then when success happens, you attribute to the strategy that you adopted, which was your own strategy. When you have that personality trait, you're less likely to have blind obedience. Yeah. Many atheists have that personality trait. They do. A lot of them, especially in many cases, right? And that's why you have, not all of them, of course, but you have many of them. That's why communists, right? Communists were atheists. That's why you have neoliberals, or, you know, the postmodern types, because they have those traits. They like blaming things. Yeah, it's because of someone else. It wasn't me. Yeah, stuff like that. It's a lack of kind of self-responsibility.
It's not only a lack of self-responsibility, it's also the fact that they are essentially stealing from God. So they purport all these ideas which they can't actually justify. And, you know, we spoke about earlier about how the new atheist movement, you know, you had Hitchens, Dennett, all these guys loud and, you know, proud and out there calling people to atheism. But now when we look at the movement's been actually dissolved, and all you have online are like these types of trolls. They're like Gollum. These people who are so schizophrenic, yeah. Like, I couldn't think of a better image that new atheism has been like this type of thing, where, you know, that whole character is basically schizophrenic. It has two different personalities. So they literally are speaking about morality when they can't justify it. They're speaking about rationality when they can't justify it. They're speaking about the fact that they have a rich contribution to science when they can't justify it. So the fact is, we have to just imagine it's like a dog which has been barking for a long time, but it's toothless. It doesn't actually have any way.
But the advice I want to give to the brothers online, and even SCDawah, and this is, you know, hopefully sincere, I think we overemphasize on atheism. You'd be surprised that there's a silent majority of people who are looking for something that, and we're not addressing those type of people. Sometimes in the online dawah, we focus on the atheist discourse. And that's not even a really Quranic approach. Like, how many times does the Quran really focus on an atheist discourse? Yeah. So I think the biggest challenge for us, and the reason neo-atheism got popular, because it basically was a kind of, it rode the wave of liberalism. It was a manifestation of liberalism. Yeah. I'm not saying they're synonymous, but liberalism is an issue for the Muslim community. And their liberal assumptions about self-ownership and the primacy on the individual and the conception of rights and how to, and even the conception of, ethics, what is good action, what are the sources of moral values, and so on and so forth. Those things are a huge challenge for the community, even postmodernism. And yes, atheism, it exists, but new atheism, with all due respect, is dead. It is dead, in my view. We can't say there is the four horsemen are buried. The janaza, khalas.
As one person said it, I'm just going to steal the analogy. Is dead, but it doesn't have the self-respect to lie down.
That's brilliant, but it's true. Now there are different forms of atheism now, but it gets a little bit not complicated, but it's intertwined with other kind of ideological assumptions. You got liberalism, you got secularism, you got forms of liberalism, you got postmodernism. These are the challenges now that we need to unpack. And just to focus on atheism all the time, it's like, come on, man, it's dead. It's dead. It's dead or dying. And I think we sometimes are stuck in our own algorithm. Like the algorithm gives us, it markets, it does it. We think we're following trends, but it's actually a little bit different, because when you study the algorithm is also designed to keep you in a certain bubble or frame. Yeah. So we need to try and jump out of that and say, okay, what are the key trends? And you'd be surprised, atheism is not the biggest issue. It's other issues. And we should still address atheism, but we shouldn't overemphasize on it. And that's why sometimes when I get invited now to give lectures at universities on God existence, I change the topic. I say, no, I'm going to do why Allah is worthy of worship, or I'm going to do the Shahada and explain the Shahada, which is why Allah is worthy of worship and why the Prophet is the final prophet. And that's far more powerful, because I believe if you show the Prophet is the final prophet using very, very powerful arguments that we have and we've developed from great people before us, we're standing on their shoulders, that proves God, it proves revelation, and it proves prophethood all in one, right? And that's why, generally speaking, classically, there was an emphasis on proving prophethood, not necessarily an emphasis on God's existence, although it was a kind of important topic when and if necessary. But now, in today's age, I think people have this intuitive feel, especially when you have like big social media influencers and thinkers, even Elon Musk, he's like, I believe there's a bigger power, because this idea of consciousness, that's his thing, right? Consciousness. So I think there's a trend now of people starting to believe in a higher power. Even when people call themselves atheists, they don't even actually mean I don't believe in God or a higher power. They mean I don't believe in religion. Right? Because they have liberal secular presuppositions. So the biggest problem here for those type of atheists is not necessarily ilhad, rejecting God's existence, but rather is that they're rejecting religion, revelation, prophethood. And those are the key things. We have powerful arguments for that, and we don't usually articulate them. Like when I go online, where is people talking about the proof of the Quran, the proof of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the need for ethics, the need for religion? Right, it's there, but we need to emphasize it more. That's my kind of general feel of things. I'm not saying I'm an online expert. I'm not saying I fully analyze the trends, but this is my hunch and my intuition. We need to take the intellectual center of the ring, not be on the ropes, God's existence. Allah says, if you ask them who created the heavens and the earth, they say it's Allah. Okay, next, let's talk about why Allah is worthy of worship. Let's talk about the Prophet. Let's talk about the civilizing force of Islam. That Islam is not a failed civilizing force. It's not a failed civilizational project. Liberalism, secularism, these isms are failed civilizational projects. Why?
Absolutely.
Because we have divine values that we need to share with people, and we're scared to share them. But people are begging for this now. They want solutions. Like, we're living in a time now. The past 5 years has changed so dramatically. We're living in a time that people on social media are very popular. Even women who don't even look like practicing Muslims, they're promoting core orthodox Islamic values, and that person 15 years ago would not be seen dead talking about these things. They would have been cancelled immediately. Now, that's for me is an indication. It's not a proof, it's an indication that there is something changing, and we need to latch onto it now and start to show, look, Islam has these timeless civilizational values, these timeless principles. Islam has revelation. It's from Allah. We could show that. Who is the Prophet ﷺ? The more you study the Prophet, the more you're going to fall in love with him. The more you understand what a remarkable human being he was, right? And to do with his mercy, his compassion, his leadership, his courage, his forbearance, his forgiveness, his communal attitude and bringing people together, his politics, his understanding, and his wisdom, his kindness, his charity, his personality as a father, his personality as a husband, his personality as a brother, as being friends with his companions, and so on and so forth. When you unpack those details and you see them in the correct context, you're like, who was this person?
Yeah.
But the greatest man to this planet. And that's fine. You may think that's ethical, emotional, but it's a solution for human beings. It's the best example. And at the same time, we have a very profound argument to show that he was speaking the truth. He could have been a liar. That should be, I think, the forefront of our discourse now as well.
Yeah. So now we're gonna come to an end of the stream. So let me just check before. Sorry,
it was so quick.
Is there? It was 2 hours.
We just got warmed up.
Hamza's getting warmed up. Hamza's getting warmed up. That's Suboor though. Suboor, you're not talking much. That's why.
No,
I know you need your coffee. I know you need your coffee.
No, bless.
I can survive without coffee. We have someone called Sam here. Welcome to SCDawah. Can you hear us?
Sam, you need to unmute yourself.
What?
Sorry.
Huh?
How are you doing, Sam? You okay?
Yeah.
Where are you calling from?
America.
Okay. And what do you think about the stream so far? What's your question?
Yeah. I think about the stream like it's. Wait a minute. Yeah, it's good. Wait a minute. You done with the stream now?
No,
you're still live. You're still live.
You're still live.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Well, anyway, like I'm literally in a library, so you're just like, no, I don't want to talk that loud. You just wait a minute. Let me just go outside.
Yeah, we'll wait for you to walk outside casually. No worries. It's like the worst time to be on a live stream. When you happen to be in a library. Allahu Akbar.
Okay, while we're waiting for Sam, Hamza, what you were saying earlier on about people turning to atheism, would you say it filled a gap? Would you say that, look, people have come to a position? Oh,
So-
Sam's back. Okay, go on, Sam.
I guess like, first of all, I just want to apologize to like all the people because it's kind of being like mean or something. Because they're talking about that word, right? Quranist or something. You know that word? That label or whatever.
Yeah, okay, yeah, go ahead.
Mhm. I don't really know where that came from, but I actually like think it makes sense. I'm not saying like it's not a reliable like it's like they're trying to make that into a sect of Islam, right? It's like, oh, what's your sect? Oh, Quranist. It's like kind of a joke. So I just want to say though is that I don't really think it's appropriate. I just don't think that it makes any sense really. You know, you could just say like someone's confused about the book or about the faith in general. Or we could keep using that word, kind of a silly word, but
What's your Sam? If you don't mind me asking before we go further,
Yeah.
obviously, just to get a better understanding of things, what's your background? Are you religious? Are you atheist? Or
well, I guess like I was raised like half like atheist and half Christian or something. Because you know,
what was that? Oh, half Christian. Okay.
yeah, like half, but also half atheist. You know, because I mean by that like they, oh darn it. Yeah, I just mean by that like my family on one side, I was raised like just like a lot of stuff going on in this library. Um,
It's the loudest
the-
library I've ever heard there. Sam.
it does get loud here. They throw parties here, I think.
That's cool.
So
what's your exact question roughly, would you say, for the stream, Sam?
yeah, like that's what I'm trying to get to. Like, I just didn't have enough time to even like form a question. I guess a good question would be like, what do you think that we could do to kind of like, I mean this, like, I'm just saying, like, you know, there's no point in like continuing to, you know, let me just keep kicking the can down the road, you know, as they say. It's like, maybe we can just kind of or let me just ask a question. What do you think would be good, all right, for us to do to come together more? Yeah, I don't want to just, I don't have the power exactly to do that just out of nowhere and be like, yeah, I have the answer. But, you know, I'm bringing it to everyone's attention, right?
Yeah.
I'm just saying, like, okay, so then what do you think that we could do as a
Do you mean as a
faith
society? Do you mean as a society, how could we all come together better? Is that what you're
community,
asking?
society or community or faith or
Community.
all those
Okay,
different
excellent question.
terms.
Okay.
No, I mean that literally. I know it's like a really crazy, like broad, general.
Well, no, I think quite a lot of people are probably asking that question. That how can we all come together? Hamza?
I don't know what amount of times that people actually ask that question. Maybe never, but I did just ask it. So I just
yes, it's a basic
what do you
question, but a
think?
very important one. Let's see what Hamza's got to say about it. Go ahead, Hamza.
Well, like with a lot of questions, the caveat that I will give is, you know, some of these questions require a lot of deep thinking. So a lot of the answers are going to be intuitive, and they're going to hopefully just plant a seed in your heart and mind, so you could continue your personal, intellectual, and spiritual journey. Yeah. But I think your question comes from an amazing place, because your question highlights a significant problem that's happening all around the world, specifically in the countries that we live in, like the UK and the US. Because of, I believe, the ideology of liberalism and secularism, especially liberalism, that has atomized the human being. Because liberalism has a kind of assumption that basically says that primacy has to be on the individual. So he doesn't have any necessary social obligations and attachments. Yeah. So you see things through the prism of the individual, whereas Islam has a different take on that, which we could talk about in a few moments. But I think the liberalism has filtered down in the personal and collective consciousness of people that they're feeling disconnected. Like, we're the most connected humans in the world, right? Especially in the West because of social media. But we are so disconnected in an authentic way from a communal perspective and from a personal perspective. I think it's because liberalism has been shoved down our throats through the media, through narratives, through focusing excessively on the individual and atomizing the individual. And this has led to social fragmentation and decay. There was a report called the Children's Society Report, published in 2004. This is almost 20 years ago. And it concluded that basically children in UK and America are suffering because of social fragmentation and decay from that perspective. And they cited excessive individualism. Yeah, excessive individualism. We have old people, our mothers and fathers, going to old people's home, and it's justified morally. Fine, in some context, it may be justified, specific context. But if you think about it, these are glorified concentration camps. Let's say a spade is a spade. These are glorified concentration camps. And you have people far more disconnected because of this kind of liberalism. And it fundamentally boils down to communal love. Now, love in the context of wanting good for the other and being committed to the other. But there's a really interesting Korean-born German philosopher called Han Byung-chul, I think his name is. He wrote the book called The Agony of Eros, and he's cited as one of the revivers of, you know, a landmark philosopher in our generation. He makes a profound point in this book and in other places. He says, we don't know how to love anymore. We don't know what it means to connect with human beings anymore because of liberalism, because of this collective narcissism. Yeah. You know, liberalism, you know, says that we're tolerant of everybody, but it wants everyone to think the same. That's what liberalism basically is. Yeah. And because of liberalism has this ideology, it's been fed down our throats. we now, and because of it's created this collective narcissism, we now don't have the other. And he's got another book called The Expulsion of the Other. So we don't know what it means for another human being to be a unique human being with their own variables, context, and so on and so forth. So since there is no other anymore, because when we see the other, it's just a protraction of our egos. It's a protraction of ourselves because we've got this narcissism. The narcissist sees themselves in everything. Yeah. So when you see the other, you're not seeing the other, you're seeing yourself. So when you love them, you don't really love them. You end up just loving yourself. And that's why we don't know how to love anymore, because we have this collective narcissism. Yeah. And there are so many other issues to talk about concerning our society. So your question on how do we come together is such a profound question. So I want to explore just a few things. The first thing is, take the Prophet Muhammad, upon whom be peace. Think about where he came in the 7th century with these warring factions and tribes. You know, it was almost like, you know, one wrong move and it's a brink of, and you have war for many years. He had the ability to bring warring tribes together, to bring conflicting tribes together, and unite them to the degree that there was social communal peace and harmony. Take, for example, the Treaty of Medina, right? Ibn Hisham, one of the famous Islamic historians, he cites the Treaty of Medina, and it talks about including the Jews. Like there'll be sympathetic treatment towards the Jews. No one's going to oppress them or harm them. He had the ability to bring different people together, not only the Arabs, like the polytheistic Arabs, but also the Jewish and the Christians together under one community, and he brought them together in a way that no one was able to do that. And when we see that these values from the prophetic way, the prophetic teachings, and from the Quran were implemented in history, we saw some amazing things. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't like to over-glorify our history because that's a sign of a defeated mind, but there are some amazing things that happened. Take, for example, Islamic Spain. Islamic Spain.
Okay, Hamza, because of time, we can't get into this.
Okay, let me just finish this point then. Let me finish the point then. And for you to explore, Islamic Spain had this thing called convivencia, it's called coexistence. The academics call it paradise on earth. You had Muslim, Christians, and Jews working together, and they had this kind of social harmony. Yeah. Take, for example, Jerusalem. There is not one Muslim, Jews, and Christians have never lived together peacefully in Jerusalem other than under Islam. Karen Armstrong, she says, the Muslims developed a system where Muslims, Christians, and Jews could live together for the first time. Jews welcomed the Muslims. Jews wanted the Muslims there. Jews felt welcomed by the Muslims, and so on and so forth. Zionism has failed there. Liberalism has failed there. Secularism has failed there. The only thing historically that we have that actually has brought these groups together has been Islam, which is the teachings of the Prophet ﷺ and the Quranic teachings. So that's something for you to explore further in terms of what has the ability to bring communal harmony. I know that's on a macro level. There was more I wanted to say, but Suboor is interjecting. But at least that plants deep in your heart and mind to continue.
Thank you so much, Sam, for joining the stream. We're now going to move on to No Name, and that's going to be the last
Salam.
Wa alaikum salam. That's going to be the last interaction. Thank you so much for joining.
So, Assalamu alaikum, both brothers.
Alaikum salam.
I am from Pakistan, and my question is related to the origins of humanity. So, but I will not be talking. I'm not talking about the physical existence of humanity, but rather the the humanity as a form of idea. So, when I was watching an Islamic debate, where we Muslims believe that the Quran is eternal because it is a form of knowledge, and God is all knowledgeable from the very beginning. So then the question that came into my mind is that, okay, God created humans, so this idea of humans, because it is the form of a knowledge, so it should also be a coexistence within the knowledge or within the realm of knowledge of God. So then I was just having this knowledge. I was just having this crisis of then how do I say that one is the creator and another is a created being if uh, if one is existing there from the very beginning?
So are you saying that human beings existed from the very beginning, yeah?
the idea of human beings, because it is a form of knowledge and God was all knowledgeable from the start, so it would like
Well, you have to
one can
understand
make
that.
this.
Yeah, exactly here, bro. I think if I got your question correctly, and please correct me if I'm wrong, there's a false assumption in your question that you're making the same God's knowledge of that there'll be a human being that is being created with the human being being created. You're making those two things the same. So since God's knowledge is eternal, and part of God's eternal knowledge is that there will be a human being, therefore, when the human being is created, in reality, the human being is also eternal. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I am saying like I know that like the created, like the current physical form, it is created, but
Yes.
the idea of humanity, like for example, just take my own life, the whole life that I have met, like I have did this thing, I have did that thing, all those things, it was always in the knowledge of God. So
Yes.
yeah, uh, in that sense,
Would you
the
say there
phy-
is?
the physical existence doesn't take that much of a focus, because I already existed very long ago. So
Okay.
this
Do you
this
do
is the
you
problem.
yeah? Do you have any children?
Right now, I don't have any children.
Okay. So if I think in my mind, you say I assume that I'm going to think in my head as an idea that you have 4 children, right? Is that idea that you have 4 children mean that 4 children actually exist? They're substantiated in the real world?
No, but in case of God, the
Yeah.
idea of God is something like the
Good.
reality should be what.
Yeah, I want you to think about that question now. So that means in order for that to be true, you're making the same God's knowledge of something will exist at a point in time, and it once wasn't existent and it came into existence. That knowledge you're saying is equivalent to being, correct?
Correctly.
Yeah, this is totally false because you have to be consistent. Because God's knowledge includes that human being once did not exist. So if you're equating God's knowledge with being, then it was the case that human beings did not exist. So therefore, human beings cannot be eternal. Simple as that.
But the idea was always there with God.
Yeah, but the idea was that he's creating a khalq, a created thing that is muhdath, that came into existence. It once didn't exist. So you need to be complete in God's knowledge on this issue. God is creating a human being. Okay, creating a human being, which means what? That was once not in existence. Wasn't there a time that you were not even spoken of, right? Human beings came into existence. Allah says in chapter 52, verses 35 to 36, did you come from nothing? Did you create yourself, right? So Allah is even indicating in his knowledge, saying that human beings are makhlooq. They're created. They are muhdath. They came into existence, which means they were once in a state of non-existence. So when Allah is saying, even if your assumption is true, Allah is saying, Allah's knowledge is indicating to us that I'm going to create a human being. Allah's going to create a human being, and and he's saying that human being was once not in existence. That's part of God's knowledge. And if you assume that his knowledge equates to reality in this context, it's the same thing, then your whole premise is false, because you can't say human beings are eternal anymore, because part of God's knowledge is that human beings are not eternal. They came into existence from a state of non-existence. So khalas, even if your assumptions were true, it would still be a false conclusion. Does that make sense?
Thank you. Yes, it makes sense. Thank you, brother.
May Allah bless you. Jazakallah.
Thank you for that. We're going to now move on to Had God Willed.
Assalamu alaikum, brothers. I just want to ask a very short question. Like, in order to argue with atheists, I think we need to also prove somehow that people have the same gods, as the Quran says, وَإِلَهُكُمْ وَإِلَهُكُمْ وَإِلَهُ وَاحِدٌ. Our God and your God is one and the same. For example, in Surah Al-Hajj, God says that Allah's name mentioned in monasteries, churches, synagogues, and mosques. But in reality, we see that people have a very different concept of God. So, Brother Hamza, how can we reconcile those verses of the Quran with what people count with their own understanding of God?
Yeah. Well, I don't think any reconciliation is needed. God affirms that there is one creator that's worthy of worship. The essence of those traditions adopted that correct understanding of monotheism, and human beings changed and evolved over time. And that's why that's the whole discourse of the Quran. It challenges those people to actually have the correct understanding of the divine. That's I don't see what the issue here is.
For example, when in Surah Al-Hajj, when we read that God's name is mentioned in the church,
yes,
and we see that Christians, beside God's name, they also adore Jesus, peace be upon him. So how can we? For them, it is very difficult to understand that we worship the same God.
No, not really. Many Christians agree that there is a creator for the heavens and the earth. So it depends what aspect of God's unity and divinity and unicity you're talking about. So a Christian, generally speaking, would affirm, for example, the aspect of God's creative agency, that there is a creator, one creator for the heavens and the earth, everything that exists.
Yeah.
But the problem starts occurring when you start talking about God's names and attributes, or some aspects of his essence, or aspects of his divinity. That's where the problem lies. That's why Allah says in the Quran, don't even say thalatha, don't even say three. So the Quran affirms they have a distorted view, right? But Allah also affirms that, there is a part of the monotheistic Abrahamic traditions that actually understand that, we have a creator for the heavens and the earth, and that he's worthy of worship. And God is trying to remind them, Allah is trying to remind them of that fact, yeah? And also Allah is also challenging the false ideas. Like even Allah challenges the different types of shirk, right? The associationism, when Allah talks about, don't take your rabbis as your lords, right? So there's a subtlety there with regards to even the shirk or associationism of the Jews, because we think they're pure monotheists as well. But no, there is, a mainstream aspect of the Jewish tradition where, and one would argue that they started to believe that now the rabbis became the source of guidance, right? And that is a form of associationism in the Islamic tradition. You took your rabbis as your lords. So from that perspective, I don't see that there's any inherent contradiction here. Allah is saying Allah is mentioned, and the interesting thing is when you look at the Aramaic Bible, Allah is mentioned, Allah, right? Or even other languages, Eloh, right? Al-Ilah, the deity. Allah is Al-Ilah, the deity. Allah, Eloh. It's part of the Semitic language. It's part of the monotheistic traditions to worship God, to believe in the creator of the heavens and the earth. This is affirmed. This is well known. Now, it's in the other aspects of God's divinity where the problems are existing, right? The problems arise, such as, the Trinity, such as taking the rabbis as sources of guidance, sources of revelation in a way, which actually happened, and so on and so forth. So Allah is challenging those aspects of associationism, and at the same time is reminding them, go back to the original source. And the original source and the original expressions of these Abrahamic traditions was, there's one God, he's worthy of worship. Don't associate partners with him. Simple as that. And the issue here is when you look at the Quranic verses, the best approach to take is to understand the Quran with the Quran. So the Quran, if you isolate a verse and you're reductionist and you take one verse and in abstraction of all the other verses and you just focus on it, you may have a misreading. Take that verse and connect it to all the other verses, not yourself, of course. The Mufassirin, the exegetes have done this for us already. We're standing on the shoulders of giants, and you'll see the full picture. What is Allah really telling us here? Because verses connect with each other. The Quran explains the Quran, which is an amazing, unique aspect of the Quran. And the Quran tells us the Quran explains the Quran. And it's one of the amazing features of revealed text, because other revelations it doesn't have that mechanism. That's why you have huge issues with regards to the Bible, the Protestants and the Catholics. In the Catholics, the church authority was the interpretive authority. But the Protestants saying, no, I'm sorry, where's your basis for that? So it's just me and the Bible myself, right? So you have the Protestant movement. They don't have, there's different, the systematic theology, German school, whatever the case may be. We don't have that problem, alhamdulillah. So allow the Quran to speak for itself. We shouldn't just reduce it to single verses. Just look at the Quran, consult the scholars, consult the exegetical texts, and the Quran would give you the full picture about how to understand the Abrahamic tradition. So yes, we believe in the Abrahamic way. He was on the straight path. He was our father. Only a fool will reject the way of Abraham, as Allah says in the Quran. Allah talks about the way of the Prophet ﷺ is essentially the way of Abraham, right? Affirming Allah's oneness and the fact that He's worthy of worship. The traditions had this. We don't believe we have a monopoly on the truth from that perspective. We believe that there was a Christian tradition, an Injil. We believe there was a Torah. We believe these were revealed texts, but they were distorted by human beings over time. And Islam came to clarify that, to bring people back to their nature, to bring people back to the truth, and to bring people back to what Allah intends for humanity, which is He is the King, and we are His servant, and we're at service to Him. We're going to obey Him, love Him, know Him, worship Him, praise Him, give thanks. And that's the simplicity of the Islamic tradition. Yeah? And that's what we want to call our Jewish cousins and our Christian brothers and sisters in humanity too. We want to show them that there's been slight distortions and deviations. We want to bring them back onto the straight path. And if you think about the Quran as a whole, it's got this path, right? Let's call it the Abrahamic path. Hanifan, yeah, the straight Abrahamic path, affirming Allah's oneness and worshipping Him. The Christians and Jews used to be on that path. So when you look at the Quranic paradigm, you're seeing humanity used to be all on that path, right? Or these traditions at least. But what happened? Some of the group of these believing peoples, they turned back, they went the wrong direction, so they were misguided. Others deviated, they went off the path, yeah? And that's essentially the kufr, isn't it, from that perspective? And you got the Muslims, those who are in a way of being that submit themselves and worship Allah, are still on that path. What we do as Muslims, we're still walking forward and we're leaving all of these people turning back and people off the path. Our job is to bring them back on, and that bringing back on the path is showing them who Allah really is and why He's worthy of worship. And they should basically accept the Prophet and the Quran, because these are the revealed sources. These are the sources that teach us exactly how to get back onto that path, which is the Abrahamic way. That's a nice framing on how to frame it, I think.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Hamza. We're going to go to our last question to Brother Sharif Taha.
Assalamu alaikum. What's up, guys? I just so I'm aspiring to do dawah inshallah one day, and my question was, when it comes to people that you see that are living a happy life, that don't really have many issues, what's the approach to them to try to get them to focus on Islam? It's difficult sometimes for people to want to discuss these kinds of topics, because obviously they have good jobs, they have nice families, they have nothing to worry about, quote unquote. I'm sure there's hidden things that we don't see on the surface, but what's something to get them to engage? I find that probably my most difficult thing when it comes to talking to people, that if they don't really engage with me when it comes to religion, how can I get somebody to engage with me when their life seems to be I don't want to say great, because you don't know really, but it seems on the surface for them to be happy and content with how their life is going.
Yeah, this is a beautiful
Is it
question.
right if we answered that as an atheist? Sorry, I'm so sorry, but is it okay if I could answer that question?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So just before you answer that question, thank you so much, Luke. I have to jump off the stream now. I just have to go. So I'll leave it to the SCDawah to continue.
Yeah, don't worry. We're going to wrap up after this.
Thank you so much.
Okay, go ahead, Luca, and then we really need to wrap up. I'm sure Brother Hamza needs to go as well. Go ahead.
No, yeah.
No, we could do another hour, bro.
So yeah, I'm really enjoying this. Well, someone for me like that isn't religious, and for someone like you, I think that if you want to engage with, if you're looking for it, I would feel like you're looking for something. You're gonna preach to me.
So I mean, my response to that would be, and I use this example a lot, and I want you to understand from I know you're an atheist, but from a Muslim standpoint, this would be like, if I gave you $1 billion,
Mhm.
and would you want to hold that $1 billion for yourself and spend it for yourself, or would you want to share that with your family, your friends, and everybody
No,
else?
yeah,
You want to give it
exactly.
to the poor.
And I think that's really cool, right? That what you have to you is like the cure for cancer, and you want to share it with everyone, and it's something that brings happiness to you, and you believe it will bring happiness to everyone else. And I guess it's a tight rope when you're trying to have a conversation and preach, because then that's where it gets kind of um if you want people to be engaged and pay attention, because it kind of happens a lot over here with a lot of preachers, like street preachers, and I know that dawah is really important, um but like there's a lot of Mormons also here have a lot of, it's kind of like dawah. They LDS Mormons, they go out and like they're missionaries and they preach and stuff. But if you want to get a true conversation and have a real um someone give their shahada like for real, having a good conversation with them, just let them live their life and they'll seek it out. You could also, and just be a good example, right? Just kind of practice what you preach, always be there. If there's a friend out there that you want to teach this to, just always be that good example of what you preach, and they'll, trust me, they will really notice it. They will notice that the way you walk, the way you talk, the way you present yourself, and if they want to like know more about it, they will kind of hint at you. But if you go out and seek for it all the time, you're gonna get a lot of like, there's hit and misses, right? I mean, if you throw a bunch of darts at a dartboard, one of them is about like gonna hit bullseye, but that doesn't mean like, oh, you have the skill to do it. I guess it's a really important like balancing act of how to preach and have a conversation with someone. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, that is very beautiful, Luke. And this is actually a good lesson for Muslims when they're engaging with other people. I think we need to have a sense of authenticity. Now, what does authenticity mean? It means that you don't have any undeclared negative intentions, and that you're committed to the well-being of other people. And if that is natural and organic, and that is coming from a good space, you're more likely to engage with people. And I really believe that the Prophet was like that. He would engage with people in an authentic way because he wanted best for them. If we come across that way, in a natural, organic way, even if it's strategized, like, I really want to speak to him because I want to give him this great thing that I have, no problem. But if you do it in an authentic and organic way, it's really, people have this radar and they understand, someone's way of being, that this person's, I may disagree with them, but they're nice and they're dedicated to my well-being. So that's a really important point. And that also means that as Muslims, we need to listen with the intention to understand. As human beings, right? We need to listen with the intention to understand someone, which is different from just listening, because we want to intend to understand them. Meaning, we're not going to just focus on the words, because we know words are vehicles to meaning. We're going to focus on the meaning, which may raise the question, okay, you said this, but what do you really mean? We want to have a meaningful conversation with people, and we're not manufacturing responses as they're speaking to us. We're authentically intending to listen listening with the intention to understand. That's one point. The other point is concerning the whole happiness issue. Sometimes I like to frame it, I wrote this in my book, I frame it from the point of meaningful happiness. Like, if you have a happy, satisfied pig, but a human being who's like just, barely making it, I think people would rather be the human being that's barely making it than being a satisfied pig, right? And this was one of the questions concerning, utilitarianism, about, it's all about utility. Obviously, I know there's responses, but that was an interesting quote. I think it was from I think Bentham or somebody else. But the point here is, we have different levels of happiness. So all human beings intuitively, we want meaningful happiness. So someone may seem happy, right? Whatever that means, and we can unpack that later. But do they have meaningful happiness? And the way to try and get them to stand in the possibility that they can have more meaningful happiness or truly meaningful happiness is to give them scenarios and give them things to think about. For example, if I say to you that everyone who's watching this has been sedated against your will and you fall asleep, all of a sudden you wake up, you find yourself on a plane, you're on first class. It's a flatbed designed for amazing, luxurious experience. You have food on tap, entertainment on tap. You have a blissful environment. Okay, sunset, sunrise, mountain peaks, the works. It's just phenomenal. Maybe for the first 5 minutes, you're going to be like eating the caviar, you're going to be playing the best games, watching the movies, sitting back on the seat. But then you're going to wake up and realize, hold on a second. How did I get here? What am I supposed to do? I don't even have my passport. Where is it going? Any human being with rational faculties and with normal intuitions would want those questions at least answered, or at least they would raise those questions in order to be meaningfully happy and to experience the things in the most optimized way. Yeah. If they can't answer those questions in that context, they won't have meaningful happiness. So life is no different. We're thrown into existence. Even the existential philosophers had this idea of thrownness, that you're just thrown into existence without your choice. And you need to ask certain basic existential questions. Where did I come from? What am I supposed to do? Where am I going? And if you don't answer those questions, then can we really claim that we have meaningful happiness? And we believe that meaningful happiness comes by being mindful to God and mindful of God and worshiping God. But that's a different thing to unpack here. Those type of thought experiments are really important. Like I remember I had this conversation with an elderly Canadian in Canada. I think it was in Canada. And he was like, I'm happy. And I said, you're happy because you suspended these questions. And from what I remember, when I raised that with him, he was like taken aback a bit, as if like, you haven't really asked these questions in a really profound way, or haven't understood the implications of why I should ask these questions. Because do I want to be someone like who was just sedated? Then I woke up all of a sudden on a plane and start enjoying things. I don't know where the plane's going, and I don't know where I came from or how I got here. No one wants to be in that state. That's not going to satisfy one's intellects or even intuitions or even their heart. So no one wants to be in that kind of existential angst, if you like. They want meaningful happiness. So they will ask those questions. And when they ask those questions, then the Muslim now can give them their answers, which we believe are true, and we could show them why they're true. So that's probably one way of addressing it. But yeah.
Well, yeah, I appreciate both your guys' responses. It's nice to hear a perspective from an atheist. It's kind of hard these days, man, to engage with people when it comes to religion and, let alone, anything else in life. Everybody's, pretty set in their ways. And, I one thing I respect about you, Hamza, is, I have a lot of, empathy toward your situation because my mother is Christian. And, I didn't grow up as a Muslim. And so for me, I have half of my family that's not Muslim. And so for me, it's very important to be able to have these kind of discussions, not only to get them to understand where I'm coming from and why I've made it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Easy and guide them. And we're at your service. Maybe we should do like a private family Zoom call one day. It would be great. We'll just have a chat.
Yeah, that would be great, inshallah.
We're at your service. Contact us. That's what we're here for. And God bless you.
Okay, yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you. And thank you, Luke, for Luke. Did I say it right, Luke?
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, it's good to hear from an atheist perspective. You don't really get to engage a lot with people that don't believe in God. So, or at least from my perspective, I know Hamza, dealing with them all the time. So, mashallah. So, yeah, it's good to hear your perspective.
Yeah, man, just keep being a good example to everyone.
Yeah, man. Or agnostic. I guess you're agnostic, correct? Not atheist. Or
no, yeah, atheist, agnostic atheist, I guess.
Okay. Well, anyways, I appreciate your guys' input, and yeah, I'll take that into consideration moving forward, inshallah.
Jazakallah khair, Brother Sharif. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you. Jazakallah khair for joining us. Brother
Okay.
Luke, do
Thank you.
you have any final thoughts? And by the way, I'm sure I saw Hamza smiling there when you said agnostic atheist, because you can't be both
Yeah,
technically.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I
you know
guess
what I mean?
I'm taking more
Yeah,
like um I guess I mean I want to talk forever. I have a lot of questions. This is really really awesome, but agnostic atheist, yeah, because agnostic meaning like I don't have the knowledge. I guess I don't know if there's a God, and atheist like just lack of the belief of a God or a deity.
Yeah, it's understandable. I understand, bro. By the way, look, you dropped your email in the private chat. Brother Sabu's got that, and also you've got our email scdawah@gmail.com. If you have any
one thing
questions,
I'd like to
at any
say,
point, yeah,
sorry,
go ahead, Hamza. Yeah.
we have a service called Lighthouse Mentoring Service. So if you go to sapiensinstitute.org/lighthouse, you could book a free 1 hour one-to-one session. It's for people who are agnostic, people who have left Islam, people who are doubting.
Sorry, it cut off like right when you were explaining the something about a
Yeah.
lighthouse, and that's the last thing I
Yeah,
heard.
so Lighthouse Mentoring is for people like yourself.
Mhm.
We deal with categories of people in terms of people who don't believe or who want to know more, and people have doubts. It's called a Lighthouse Mentoring Service. So if you go to sapiensinstitute.org/lighthouse, if there's an online booking system, you fill in the form, you booking your session, and then there'll be a mentor who'll be able to spend a whole 1 hour with you, one-to-one, on Zoom, just discussing whatever you want to discuss. And we do this for people who have doubts and so on and so forth. If you mention in the comments on the registration that Hamza told you to go in the Lighthouse, you get that session. And then you can have a conversation with one of the mentors, and you can have multiple conversations. Some people have used it 5 times, I believe. So that's an
Okay,
avenue as well.
awesome.
But please email SCDawah as well. But you could also have a mentor private one-to-one. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Awesome, yeah.
I put the Lighthouse link in the comment section for you, Luke, and I'll hopefully pin it in the chat as well. So inshallah, it's a very helpful. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless Hamza and the brothers who are Sapiens Institute who are setting this all up. It's a very difficult thing to do. It's not easy to give all that time to people, but mashallah, may Allah bless them that they do. So yeah, Luke, we hope that this has been an eye-opening or ear-opening session for yourself, and that this is the thing: ask questions and move forward. It's always that's the thing, isn't it, Luke? You're always going to have to ask questions. If we just sit there, we're never going to change. So by all means, you're doing the right thing, and I think it's been a great live show. MashaAllah, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless everyone who supported it and shared it. And I think we're soon going to have to wrap up. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
But
awesome.
Jazakallah
Thank you so
khair. Thank
much.
you for. Yeah.
No worries. May Allah bless you.
Thank you, Luke. Try and join us next time. Yeah, it'll be amazing, mate. All right. Hopefully
Awesome,
next
yeah.
week at some point. Thanks, Luke. Take care. Cheers. All right, brother Hamza. Jazakallah khair. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you.
You guys
As
are
always.
getting old, man. What's this? Just over 2.5 hours. We're expecting like a marathon here. Yeah. What's going
Don't worry,
on?
we'll set you up. We'll set you up for like 5 hours next time.
Yeah, you need to eat your greens, man. You need to eat
It's
your
Saboor. Look, he's gone. Look, he ran away
Bless
with
you,
some
bro.
lame excuses because he didn't have his
You know
coffee.
what? Exactly for the opportunity, because
Yeah.
you provided this opportunity, and it's an undeserved favor. May Allah bless all of you, and inshallah, let's do another one. Let's try and do a 5-hour marathon one day. Yeah?
Inshallah. A last reminder, because I know brother Hamza won't do it. As you see, his tag is at Hamza Sources Official. Please go to his channel and subscribe. We need more of these type of channels, inshallah, and we need more of these lives, inshallah, soon. Jazakallah khair for everyone joining. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.